student still, as yet, require, it's, actually you're right, ma'am. A teacher is always a student forever, others are never a teacher. Absolutely. Thank you, ma'am. Because I think today what many of us lack, you guys are lucky, we lack was practical experience. But today you all are so lucky to get experts to come and meet and talk and share without anything. So without much ado, welcome once again everyone. It is my great pleasure to invite Manjula ma'am to be the chief guest on behalf of the Department of Public Policy and all of us students. Thank you so much, ma'am, for coming. I was reading, I know ma'am because I worked on a project when ma'am was at the Administrative Training Institute, and that was my first meeting, and I've had great experiences. We've agreed to disagree, we've disagreed to agree, I've learned a lot at ATI and especially from ma'am, I must say. And so I was going through, how do I introduce her? What should I tell about her? There are a lot of things, but since we're short of time and you all can always talk to her during the break if you all want to, I have a brief introduction to ma'am. Ma'am is from the Karnataka 1987 batch. She's a retired IAS officer. And during her tenure as an IAS officer, she wore several hats, leading some important government departments with the government of Karnataka. She was the additional Chief Secretary, Government of Karnataka, and then was transferred and posted as Additional Chief Secretary, Personal and Administrative Reforms, Government of Karnataka. Now, many of you all may not know what it is. Go and Google and find out what all these things are, okay? I know, I only picked up some, to be very honest, there are too many posts, and that really shows that how important a role she's played in the government of Karnataka in her capacity. She completed her graduation from the Osmania University, Hyderabad. And I remember, ma'am, reading an interview of yours where you brilliantly said, a leader must be intuitive, creative, be able to lead by example, and never be afraid of taking tough decisions. And I can say with full thing, that's exactly what she used to do, what she does. Never afraid of saying, and uses all her experience. I also strongly believe that she practiced this, and we as leaders should imbibe this quality of ma'ams. She added that her formative years in the IAS equipped her with skills and experience required for dealing with and managing complex issues innovatively. She was the Director General of the prestigious institute called Administrative Training Institute based in Mysuru. We were just talking to ma'am, both Dr. Harini and I, when we were bringing her up. We said, of course she's not there, we would love to take the students on a field trip to ATI because they teach IAS faculty, they teach IAS, they teach KS, and you should see how they prepare for the classes to deal with the IAS people. Her last assignment was with the Karnataka Appellate Tribunal. She was also the Commissioner of the Directorate of Urban Land Transport. So ma'am, one thing I remember, in ATI she wanted to introduce, it's a huge campus, cycles for people to move around. So even in Bangalore, she's done as the head of the DULT, a lot of innovative things to try and stall or control the traffic with a lot of innovative ideas. I can say this because I've seen models of some of these in DULT when I used to go for a meeting. So now I request ma'am to kindly deliver the inaugural address. So ma'am, you want to come and stand here? You want to sit and speak? It's all yours. You want to come here? You can come here.
No. You want me to come there or I can speak from here?
You can.
Yeah. Thank you, Annapurna. It's very nice to be among with such distinguished women, all starting with A's, except of course Harini and I are exceptions. Annapurna, Anita Kurup, Anupama Shetty, and Amruta Girish, and the students here. First of all, let me thank Manipal Academy of Higher Education and the Department of Public Policy for inviting me to be the chief guest for this workshop. And I think congratulations are also due to the students for thinking about organizing a research workshop on a very important topic, gender and policy. We all know policy is a statement, it begins with a statement of intent, aims and objectives, goals that probably we want to achieve. Now, our scriptures have a very nice, definition of the energies that every individual possesses. Ichha Shakti, Jnana Shakti, Kriya Shakti. So if you try to apply the same to any public policy, first of all, there has to be Ichha Shakti, that is, your intent, your aim, or your goal has to be properly defined. Next, you should have Jnana Shakti, that means the necessary tools, the knowledge, the skills that are needed and the resources that are needed to translate that intent into reality should be there. And thirdly, Kriya Shakti. You may have both, first two, but if you don't take any action and you don't move, then naturally you don't achieve anything. In Sanskrit, there is a very nice saying. It talks about an ant. An ant, it keeps on moving, it will cover a longer distance, the saying says, rather than a hawk which sits on a tree, on the branch of a tree, and doesn't move. So movement is important, action is important, and that's where you have the importance of Kriya Shakti. Instead of going on about the theoretical aspects, etc., I thought I'll give you some examples where I see all these kind of converging and making things happen. The first example I wanted to give is an example that I like the most. That's about our Pulse Polio campaign. You all know in 2011 or thereabouts, polio was eradicated from our country. And we have been polio-free all these years. But that didn't happen in a day. Now, in 1950s or so, polio vaccine was discovered. And we also had our immunization program, universal immunization program. And I remember when we were in school, and I don't know whether you have, most of us from that generation have that sign. Health workers used to come to the school and give us tika days. And you have big round mark on your arms to say that you've taken those tikas. But polio vaccine is orally administered. So till 1995, we had significant number of cases. Then the government decided, it's not that they were lacking either in intent or action, but somehow they had to decide about, of a different action. So there has to be a paradigm shift in the action that is done to achieve the goal. So they decided with the help of various UN agencies and so on, that instead of waiting for people to come to the health centers for the vaccine, government will go to the doorstep of the children in the 0 to 5 years age group and will administer vaccine. That's a big intent. But imagine the scale at which it has to be done. In a country like ours, we can't compare ourselves to some tiny country somewhere and say that, oh, they have achieved and why we have not achieved. We are a big country, huge in terms of diversity, huge in terms of population, land mass, etc. So it was done as a campaign. And the pathways, we keep talking about systems thinking. Many times, you may have a pathway, but the pathway is not a single pathway. There are interconnections that will have to converge for a goal to be achieved. Example, in case of Pulse Polio program, first of all, if you have to administer vaccine at the doorstep, your cold chain has to be robust enough. You need to have necessary infrastructure at various levels, so that had to be strengthened. That was one level of action. The second is, to do it on such massive scale, you can't rely upon only health department workers. So you have to mobilize the entire government, that is known as whole of government. You need to get people from agriculture, horticulture, whichever department. They all have to be mobilized, they had to be trained, they had to be made aware of the importance of this campaign. And then thirdly, you need to arrange other logistics. What are the routes? And vehicles have to be requisitioned. And fourthly, you need to get other actors also into the picture, like the Gram Panchayat, like the religious leaders, and so on and so forth. All that was done, and from 1995 to 2011, so It went on every year. On a single day, per year, the polio drops were, I think sometimes they were twice a year or only once. Once a year, polio drops were administered at the doorstep of, every child which was in the targeted age group. What do you learn from this case study? Number one, whenever we talk about a policy, scale is important. We should not forget about it. So that is an important aspect to be kept in mind. Number two is feedback loops. So when this pulse polio campaign was implemented across so many years, it got better and better. In 1995, I was in the district, and I was part of the initial first pulse polio campaign. So I went around visiting some villages to see how it is happening. And I went to an interior village, and along with the health workers, went to a house where the child is there of that age group. We knocked on the front door, and we were waiting, and somebody came running and said they are escaping from the back door. And we saw the parents with that child of few months old going, from the back door, escaping from the back door into some, wilderness that is there. So it meant that communication and awareness had to increase further. So the stakeholder engagement is an important feedback loop, and stakeholder engagement, both are very important. So when we speak about stakeholder engagement, we have Gram Panchayats, we have community leaders, religious leaders. Religious leaders were asked to, preach after their prayer or whatever, they were asked to speak about pulse polio. Now imagine if one religious leader said, this is against our religion. Entire program would come down, crashing. So they had to be taken into confidence. So scale, stakeholder engagement, having feedback loops, systems thinking. These are all important aspects which get demonstrated in this pulse polio campaign. Now the second aspect I wanted to touch upon is about inclusivity. We say our policies have to be inclusive, right? Now are policies exclusionary? No. Unless you have a policy which targets a particular group, there are. But most policies are maybe implicitly inclusive. But are they really inclusive? That's a question mark. So I want to again give an example. Annapurna is so fond of ATI, she's been talking about it, so I'll take ATI example. ATI, as she mentioned, is a premier training institution, and it has the task of training government employees. And Government of Karnataka has a training policy, and as a part of the policy, the objective is to train government employees from time to time so that their knowledge and skills get upgraded, right? And they can discharge their functions more, with responsiveness and with more responsibility. So ATI has been doing this for years. In fact, I also, when I came to Karnataka, got trained in the ATI. So imagine my surprise when, as Director General of the ATI, I received a letter from association representing visually impaired government employees. In that letter, they said, we are about 2,000 odd visually impaired government employees, and we are all graduates and postgraduates. We have put in 5 to 10 years of service in the government, and a majority of us have not undergone single training program. We feel we have been underutilized, we need training. Now our training policy was not exclusionary, right? It didn't say don't train visually impaired. But unless, the important point I want to stress is policies have to be, must talk about inclusivity explicitly. If you don't do so, it is quite possible that you lose sight of that. Now the second issue is, if you are going to train the visually impaired employees, it's not like any other training where you put them in the classroom and you train them. And you need a software, because most of the things nowadays in government are done on computer. You have e-office, then you have Panchatantra. They're working in various departments, they have to handle multiple software applications. So there is something called NVDA, Non-Visual Desktop Access. It's a bridge application, it will help them to, it is compatible with all the Windows, Microsoft applications and also third-party applications. So when our faculty interacted with you have to tell me when I'm crossing my time limit, otherwise I will go on. So when our faculty interacted with the association and the visually impaired government employees, they realized there are two categories. A majority of them did not know how to use NVDA. So first of all, you have to start, and our faculty did not know anything about NVDA till then, because ATI never handled this. So first you have to train them in NVDA, then you can give them all training on e-office and other things and so on and so forth. So important point is that ATI had to improve or strengthen its computer infrastructure, because this training cannot be done in classrooms, it has to be done in computer rooms. Get the NVDA software, it is free anyway, and install everywhere. Convert the material into Braille, find and locate trainers who are normal trainers, and as well as who are visually impaired also, who are not. Both are required to train. So all that has to be done, and then the logistics. So if you are going to train 100 people at one go, you require, in a computer hall, you can only accommodate 20, 25. So you have to do it in multiple halls. So people have to be accommodated in such a manner that their movement between their place of accommodation to the training hall to the lunch place, all that can be done without much walking here and there across the campus. A point I'm trying to make is, inclusivity is not that just because you say inclusive, it becomes inclusive. You need to put in effort, you need to put in the resources, and that has to be acknowledged in any policy. If it is not done so, you will not be able to achieve. In this instant case, ATI did not have any additional funds for this purpose. Somehow, some savings were there and it could be done. But suppose there are no funds to augment the infrastructure, etc. We all know, at least in government training institutions, don't get much support and funding. This program would not have taken off. So inclusivity, point here, repeating again, has to be explicitly mentioned in any policy, and there has to be resources, the necessary resources that need to be assigned for this purpose. That's the second aspect I wanted to address. Third is coming to the topic of the day, gender and policy. When we were in the districts implementing total literacy campaign, there was a slogan, very nice slogan, which said, I don't know how many of them understand Kannada, but some of them, Hennondu kalitare shalayondu teradante. If a girl studies, it's as good as opening a school. So the contribution of women for nation development is acknowledged. But then why are there so many obstacles? You talk to any successful women, they have all encountered invisible walls, glass ceilings, and so on and so forth. So after some time, I think probably women get used to negotiating obstacles. So you take them for granted. If there is no obstacle, you will be surprised. So you have to negotiate each and every obstacle. But who are the women that we are talking about? And is this something which we find only in our country, that this disparity? Many years back, I was invited to a workshop in Berlin on feminist policies in urban transport. There are women who are from government, women who were heading companies, transport companies. There are women who are heading technology companies. We had also interaction with the German side, including German senator and so on. People from Malaysia, Indonesia, Latin America, India, of course, Ukraine, so many. The common theme was discrimination, disparity, how they had to literally push themselves to get some acknowledgement of the requirement of women and their need to be built into a policy. It was so common. It was even from Germany they were talking about it. All the speakers from Germany were only talking about why there, about the disparity in their own systems. So it means this is something universal. So we need to acknowledge that, and we cannot say, as somebody was the other day in one function in our society, somebody was saying on Women's Day, now you don't need to really work for it or talk about it because women are in the forefront. Now, this is something which every time people say, you know, if 4 people come on the four women are in the forefront, they'll say women are in the forefront. Now you don't need to do anything further. So this is an aspect we need to acknowledge. But, okay, we are talking about women as a homogeneous group now. And this applies to men also, but that's not the topic here. So sorry to the men who are here. So, but there is also heterogeneity among women. Who are the women we are talking about? They could be educated, semi-skilled, women going for daily employment, women who have the burden of care, and women who are from conservative backgrounds, women from rural areas. There is something called persona. So whenever you have a policy trying to address women issues, you need to also think about which persona that you are trying to issue. We are going to that granularity today because you cannot simply say something and say it will achieve its purpose. Again, I want to give an example to illustrate that. We all know bus transport is free now in Karnataka for women and girls. Okay. Second, let's take a village. Okay. There is a village A, and in the village A, you have only upper primary school. Okay. And the high school is in village B. And village B is at a distance from village A, not a walking distance. You need to take a vehicle to go to village B. In village A, let's say people find that many girl students are dropping off. They are not attending to high school. They are dropping off after upper primary school. Because there is no proper travel, commute, the opportunity to commute or vehicle for commuting between A and B. Now your policy and the status here. So the policy is of no use to the given situation, right? There is no bus. Even if it is free, when there is no bus, what are you talking about? Now let us introduce something here. Let us introduce a bus. Okay, a bus service between A and B. Let us say the high school starts at 9 o'clock and ends at 3 o'clock. Suppose the bus, which is in B, village B, because bigger villages have the depots and buses are stationed there, starts from village B at 10:30 in the morning and comes to village A. Does it serve any purpose? No, because the school going time is different. So the policy could have said, any policy could have said, okay, we have this free travel, but let the district administration and the transport companies analyze if there is any issue, travel issue because of which girl students are dropping off, or in which case what needs to be done, and whether schedules of the bus services need to be changed, etc., etc. So that 1-2 lines in the policy would have made everybody to kind of look at it. So sometimes we need to also look at the personas whom the policy aims to kind of benefit. Now the other aspects which are in general that I want to talk about policy, because others are going to talk about education, health and skill development, is this. There could be inherent biases in the policy from policy makers, or sometimes when you are analyzing from the researchers also. An example, we all talk about Bangalore's congestion, you mentioned. Now, other countries too have this problem of congestion, but many of them have decided to focus more on public transport and making their cities more walker-friendly and cyclist-friendly. Recently, there was an article in our newspapers that government wants to construct tunnel roads or increase the road surface. We all know that is not going to help because there are examples, anecdotal examples from across the world, which indicate the more road surface that is, the more people will be tempted to buy vehicles. There will be more vehicles on the road, which will lead to more congestion, right? So, but why did the policy did not take into account these best practices? Inherent bias of policymakers, because we all travel by vehicles, right? When we travel by vehicles, we are only thinking, how do I travel? It is there at the back of the mind. So as researchers also, sometimes you may have a standpoint, and when you actually get into research, that may come into that and cloud your work. So you need to be very aware of that. You have to acknowledge that bias and you need to stand outside that bias and do your analysis. That is quite important. The other aspect about, policies, when we speak of policies, is, again, going back to our, it is in Upanishad. Upanishads talk about Shreyas versus Preyas. Shreyas is something which has long-term benefit. Preyas is something which is immediate pleasure. Its gratification is immediate. So sometimes in the policies, the focus is on preyas rather than Shreyas. Because you want something to happen immediately. Everybody wants something to happen. So it has to be a mix of those things. You cannot only have prayers and not Shreyas. So that is another issue that we need to keep in mind. So I think you are all budding researchers on public policy. It's good to know so many people are interested in that. Personally, I feel there is not much dialogue or discussion in public fora about various public policies, their impacts, etc., etc. And we need more such discussion from people who are dispassionate and who have done rigorous work. Otherwise, I know, if you have these consultants even from the big companies, you just have to tell them, this is what I want, and they will bring all the data to prove that that is what is needed. Suppose I say I need maybe, what example? Maybe tunnel road, and I have to keep talking about tunnel road. So if I say I need a tunnel road, the consultant will give all the data and convince you that there is a tunnel road that is needed to be built now only, not tomorrow or day after. Today itself, the work should start. So data is something which can be manipulated, so be conscious of that. Today you are lucky. There is so much of data available, and also the fact that you have the necessary algorithms or necessary applications to analyze that data. But when the insights come, you should not take it for granted. You have to question. So how is it? Sometimes, our understanding of something will be different, and data may present something. Is that correct? So questioning mind is something which is needed for every researcher. Okay. That is something which you should develop. I look forward to see more discussion emerging on policy issues from here. Keep an open mind, and you have such experts, and ask them multiple questions, and keep discussing. Nothing, see, in any field, including in public policy, there is nothing right or wrong. What is right for you may be wrong in my perception. What is wrong in my perception, you may say it is the right thing to do. So any question is welcome when you are talking about public policy. So having said this, I hope I have not exceeded my time. So I once again thank the organizers for inviting me, and I wish the conference a great success, and good luck to you all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Such wonderful examples, practical. You've seen it, done it, challenged it, done everything. I think this is what we all need today in any conference or classes. And I think as a Department of Public Policy, this is one thing we try to bring in our policy lab and in the other classes, the practicality of any policy or issues or challenges. Because we all know any of us can get information on the internet, chat GPT, anywhere. But how is it used is, I think, what is important in the education system today. It's really wonderful, ma'am, whatever you spoke. I now request Palak, our PhD scholar, to kindly thank ma'am by giving a small memento from all of us. Thank you, ma'am. I forgot to mention one thing. We did have Dr. Raghavendra Prabhu, our Deputy Registrar, who was supposed to come and give the welcome speech, but unfortunately he sent us a mail saying that he's held up with some delegates over there, so he cannot come, but we'll move on. So now I request Dr. Harini Santanam, Associate Professor and Head of the Department, to give us an overview and introduce us to the theme Gender and Policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Annapurna. A very good morning to everyone here. Thank you, ma'am, Manjula ma'am, for being with us here today and starting off this very important event in DPP's history together with such beautiful examples and case studies and how we can look at the policy dimensions in a multifaceted manner. Thank you all for students who have come from other external organizations who have joined us today. It's a great pleasure to have you all here as well as the students from DPP. So this event is called, as you can see, Dr. TMA Pai Research Conference, Student Research Conference. So I'd like to start by paying respects to our founder and visionary, Dr. TMA Pai, from his simple vision of having a very strong educational ecosystem. Here we are today with so many thousands and thousands of students who have benefited from the vision that created this ecosystem, and I pay my respects to him. And I think it is through his tireless efforts and the people who have followed in his footsteps, we are here today, and MAHE has given us this space to engage in these very useful and very important discussions from the policy aspects. And I thank our experts who are here, who have joined us here today. Of course, there will be a formal vote of thanks, but I just think that, it's a pleasure to have you here. And I have worked with some of you and look forward to working with some of you. It's always a pleasure to have you here. So more than an introduction to gender and policy, which I will actually, stress upon a little later, I would start with introduction to SAMAH. So the word SAMAH is here actually to represent balance. Balance as in what? So as the Manjula ma'am very rightly mentioned, there are different aspects to policy making, and we have to balance these different aspects if we want to get to that vision and the mission that is in front of us. And I think the balance is particularly important because all policy decisions are multifaceted by nature, and inherently they bring in the complexity that goes with the decision making. And hence it's very important for us to recognize the balance not only within ourselves but also across the stakeholders who will engage in policy debates and discussions to move forward anything. So an organization can only achieve its vision and mission if the stakeholders realize how crucial and how important it is for us to engage in these discussions and look at the mission and the vision, first the vision and then the deliverables as the most important and not the individuals alone or what the individuals think about certain things, because we can only collectively contribute. There's no way that only one person can move anything ahead. It is a collective contribution, and that's what SAMAH is about. And this is a forum that the DPP students, the Department of Public Policy students, they have a club called Sangrah, through which they have initiated this and they drive it forward. So essentially it is a students' event which is by, for, and of the students. And I'm glad that we are here in the second edition of SAMAH this year, and I hope that this will go on in the years to come. To talk about gender and policy, this was also an idea that the students suggested by themselves. They came up with a lot of ideas and brainstorming about topics that they wanted to take up. And gender and policy, they felt, were at the cornerstone of every other discussions that happened. And I'm glad that they came out with this topic, because what's more pertinent today is not just whether gender as it is seen is only mostly associated with feminism. It's not just that. It is about striking the balance between how different fractions or genders in a society come together and play that important role to move policy decisions forward without bias and without neutrality, as ma'am had mentioned. And it's very important to maintain this unbiasedness in policy decision making. So I think it's a very important subject we will touch upon. Whether it be from a rural perspective, an urban perspective, from any other perspectives that are very important. Some of our students, for example, are working on their projects. The final year students, they're working on projects which relate to gender and policy, and I'm hoping that they will show their results and present it to you all. So it's very important that we think of gender under the lens, the holistic lens definitely, but also the specific domains that are associated with it. And that actually improves our understanding in ways genders can work together. We are no longer, binary genders. we have moved away from that, and the time here is to consider all the other genders that are out there and also make space for them. And inclusivity, as ma'am mentioned, is very, very important from that aspect. And I think as policy students, when you do surveys, when you look at data, I think these are things that we have to be cognizant about, the changing trends in the society and how we incorporate that into the work that's done on the policy front, in the front lines. So with that small introduction, I thank all of you all again for being with us today, and I hope you have a very powerful forum. Students especially, you use this forum to exchange your ideas, your work, how you look at gender and policy, and come up with a lot of, I think surprises are necessary. You know, we have heard a lot about things, we have heard about data, but we want to hear from you, which is most important for us to consider moving forward as policymakers or budding policymakers in your case. So thank you all for joining today, and I wish all the very best for SAMAH to proceed. And please make sure that you use this forum to your benefits, and also be benefited through interaction, basically, which is most important here to take forward. I think the memory of SAMAH 2024-25 should stay with you for the impact it has created in your individual lives as well. So make sure that you engage yourself in that way. Thank you so much, and welcome to the experts again.
Thank you, Dr. Harini. Actually, you should have spoken before, ma'am, but I forgot to call you. I'm really apologize. It really clearly shows how old I'm getting, or I am. It's not getting. Anyway, doesn't matter. Thank you, ma'am. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We are all, as I said, it's an informal setup. Since we do have a little bit of time, of course, tea, coffee is ready outside. If we can use the presence of ma'am, if you all have any questions to ask her, if you don't mind, ma'am, you can please ask questions. Anybody would like to ask any question? Yes, Priyanka. You can switch on the mic, right. You can, please introduce, that won't work, right? Yeah, please introduce yourself and this thing. You have one more? Okay, you do this. Give me that. Yeah. Introduce yourself, your name and your designation.
Sure. Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Priyanka. I'm an assistant professor here at the Department of Public Policy. So, first of all, I would like to thank ma'am for your insightful speech and what you have delivered in terms of the gap that we see when we have it in terms of policy and the practice. But I just do have a small question. Like you said that, you know, there is nothing wrong and right when it comes about the policy making. So what I want to ask you is that if there is nothing wrong and right when it comes about the policy making, how do you come to a common consensus that can bring a greater welfare for the society?
Is it working? Okay. What I said was that when you talk about a policy, when you question, I said the questions, there is nothing right or wrong with the questions that you talk about in a policy, right? About policy.
I can give it.
I'll take this mic. Thanks, Priyanka.
So firstly, I mentioned that when you need to question every policy with an open mind. That's the idea with which I said there's nothing wrong or right in questioning any policy. Number two is, you need to look at Shreyas, the larger good, the beneficial impact. I'll just give an example. We were planning for a bus rapid transit system between twin cities of Hubli and Dharwad. There are about 1 lakh people traveling by bus between Hubli and Dharwad. And this BRT would earmark some lanes, you know, exclusively for the movement of bus. So we had to do a lot of public consultations. At every public consultation, a group used to come and oppose that project. They would say, our vehicles will get stuck up. There will be congestion for our vehicles. No, they are people who are traveling by their own cars or motorcycles or whatever. So when you have that, you need to think who are the beneficiaries, who do you want to benefit. First, of course, you have the environment, you know, because if more people are going by bus, then naturally the climate change that is being caused due to all these vehicular emissions will come down. Secondly, about a large number of people who are traveling by bus. So there, if the BRT is going to help them, then you need to take that into consideration in a project, right? That's one example. Similarly, let's say metro construction is going on. The large number of people are impacted because their lands and their buildings are, demolished, they are acquired. But sometimes it happens that way. You need to also look at the larger good and what is the impact that this particular project is going to leave in long term. So long-term benefit is also one of the important aspects that you need to consider. Have I answered your question? Yes.
Anyone else would like to ask a question to ma'am? Anyone? Yes, Dr. Grace. I think please give me your mic. That probably is working.
Hello. Hello. Since again, in related to what she has asked, since you talked about policy, can be good and bad, right? So when we talk about something which is good and bad, it's a question of ethics, right? So I have been conducting research on food security and specifically investigating the problem of exclusion in the public distribution system. So we have been, conducting the decennial census ever since the beginning. But this time we haven't conducted a census. The last census that we have is of 2011, right? So that also comes within the purview of, government policy decision, which leads to exclusions of many marginalized people, Indians. So is that good or bad, and how do we, contextualize?
See, if you look at the context, census gives you the broad statistics. That doesn't mean that people who are eligible are left out. See, even without census, there is always, beneficiaries are let's not call them beneficiaries, people who need to, get into the public distribution system, they are identified. So it's not that everything is stopped because census has not happened. After all, census happens once in 10 years, right? So it's not that, because census has not happened, suddenly, everybody is getting excluded. That's not so.
So as with regards to this, the National Food Security Scheme,
Grace, please use the mic because it's being recorded and live
Hello.
telecast. That's right.
Hello, is it working? Yeah. Hello?
Hello.
Sorry, Grace.
Check.
So meanwhile, I want to, because there is some confusion on good or bad policies that is there among people. See, for example, tunnel roads, are they good? No, if you ask somebody, they will say, some people who are traveling by car, they will say it's good. But if you really look at from the point of view of environment or from the point of view of how it is benefiting larger number of people, it's not good. So when you have a policy, you need to ask questions from various perspectives. That is what I wanted to stress. It's not simply from the perspective, your standpoint, whatever it is, you need to keep it aside. Otherwise what happens is, you may think it's not, like, suppose say I'm a researcher and I already decided tunnel roads are bad. Then naturally when I analyze that, I will say it is bad. So often, we have our own views and opinions. As a researcher, we need to kind of step out of that view and opinion and analyze a policy purely on its merits. So that's the sum and substance of it. And yeah. I can't hear you. If you can listen a little bit.
You can switch on that mic too. Yeah.
And so the statements that I'm making here is not an opinion, it's based on evidence-based. So the National Food Security, according to the Act, it covers 67% of Indian population eligible to receive subsidized food under public distribution. But because we are relying on 2011 census, there are many who are still left out, eligible people who are still left out. So if you look at the, because each individual states union territories, they have their own system of
So that is, yeah. So I, no, see, look, you need to, see, this is not common, this is not universal. If you look at Karnataka, please take Karnataka statistics. You know, I think 90% of people are getting food grains in Karnataka. So it depends on each individual state's classification of who should benefit from it. So for example, you talk about Karnataka, apart from what the central government is giving as its food grains and quota in the public distribution system, Karnataka is also giving over and above that. So there are beneficiaries who are coming under the central scheme, and there are beneficiaries who are benefiting from the Karnataka scheme, totally. So it is left, therefore, when you have this, entire India, there is a software where you can, wherever you have the ration card, you can get the, food grains. You will find people who have the state card, who are under the state quota, state beneficiary list, will not get that benefit of getting food grains in another state because they are not coming under the central list. So every state has its own way of, identifying the eligible beneficiaries. So census gives you the data, but it's not going to be, just because there is no census, you have to exclude large numbers. Every state has its policy. Like in Karnataka, even today, the applications are being taken. But there is also a parallel process, right, of weeding out ineligible applications. So recently, when I think a few months back, when the Karnataka government compared this data with, let's say, who is paying GST, and where multiple databases they took. So when they compared multiple databases, they were able to find people who are ineligible and who had to be weeded out. So even in the survey form, they ask, do you have a vehicle, do you have this, etc., etc. So there are two ways. It's quite possible. I'm not saying, all eligible beneficiaries have been covered. It is quite possible. Some people did not know how to apply, or some people were marginalized and they did not, get covered. And some ineligible beneficiaries also are in the system. It is not because, it is the practice that is failed, right? While implementing, the ineligible beneficiaries somehow have not been able to take care of that. Yeah. So that way you have multiple, sort of examples that are there. So when you evaluate a policy, you need to see, how on ground it is working also, right? It's not simply about...
Yeah, so that's what we have been trying to do. We go to the field because we have to investigate these problems, yes, right? So that's our job and we have to do that.
That is different in every state. You see, you are from which state?
I am from the state of Nagaland.
Nagaland.
Yes.
So actually, maybe it is different in Nagaland. I am not aware of the situation in Nagaland.
No, but I have been also doing research, a lot of research in Delhi as well. But I do understand that South Indian states have been doing relatively well compared to other states. But the problem with the, the outdated census is because it also, becomes very difficult to plan policies and implementation without an updated data census, right? So.
Then that is true. I'm not saying it's not, but that's not the... See, for various reasons, census could not be conducted, right? But that doesn't mean that things have come to a standstill, right? So there are other surveys and other data that is available for people to bank upon. It's not that everything has come to a standstill and no development is happening or not possible or things like that.
No, I didn't say that. Since you talked about good and bad policies, it was just an open question.
See, what is good for the goose may not be good for the gander, that kind of a thing. So, and again, let me clarify, when I said good and bad, it is dependent on your perspective. So I mentioned very clearly, individual perceptions or perspectives may be there, and you need to question. Suppose you feel, for example, as a researcher, internally you feel, already you have decided this is a good policy, and then when you're doing a research, you will, your bias will creep in. So you have to question that yourself. You have to keep your, individual opinions besides while, doing it. Similarly for policy makers also.
This is based on facts and evidences, right?
No, I'm not refuting that, ma'am. I'm not saying you are talking about it. I'm generally responding. I'm not responding to you, saying you have not done it.
I'm very much with you when you talk about inclusivity, right? Yeah, yeah. So what I'm trying to say is that if we have had an updated census data, we could have more people included in a welfare system that could contribute to inclusivity. That's what I'm trying to say.
See, I mean, that doesn't really, lack of census is not, it's an opinion. It's your opinion, fine. So to my mind, as a policy maker or, as an administrator, it's not necessary that you don't have data, you don't have anything happening. Today also there are many schemes that are going. You may say, okay, that will, big picture you may get across the country. And that also depends on type of questions you ask in the census and so on and so forth. It's quite possible. You may say, yes, you prove it in your thesis. I have no issue with it. You have to show who should have benefited, has not benefited, because there is no census. So these are all open-ended kind of, issues which we can investigate. Absolutely no issue with that. See, therefore, I cannot come to a conclusion and say, yes, it is bad. I have not investigated that. I have not investigated the question of lack of census is impacting the implementation of welfare schemes. If you look at it, there are any number of welfare schemes. We also need to keep in mind one thing. We sometimes think welfare schemes like the safety net, welfare schemes are supposed to provide the safety net to the vulnerable population, right? But today, sometimes we see the safety net is so large that actually people who should benefit are not in it, but everybody else also gets into it. So that has to be also kept in mind. And also, you don't have so many resources to put all for welfare schemes. Then other things like infrastructure, etc., get affected. So you need to also see how big should be the safety net. There is a very, nice Chinese proverb everybody knows, no, right? What is that? Like you teach a man how to give a man a fish, he can eat it for one day. You teach him how to fish, then he has skill for the lifetime. But then Trevor Noah, how many of you know Trevor Noah, the stand-up comedian? He wrote a book called Born a Crime. In that book, he says, okay, teach a man how to fish, but also create an ecosystem where he gets the necessary assistance to have access to tools, etc., so that he can ply his trade. So, but that is not that takes effort. So that's where I'm saying Shreyas versus Preyas. Something doesn't take much time, oh, you give fish to everybody and fine. Today they will eat. But that is sometimes the welfare things work like that. But on the other hand, you have to do the other way. You need to put in more effort, you need to put in more resources, you need to train, you have to create the ecosystem and so on. Example from skill development, of course you are going to deal with it. Earlier we had an skill development program. It's not something new. We had a program called TRISEM, long back. So youth used to be trained. That's it, trained. Now they used to get paid a stipend. That became a employment kind of program. So people would get trained in carpentry, plumbing, electricity, whatever, because they would move around the TRISEM system just getting the stipend. But after that, the government has changed the policy. I think in the skill development policy today, what is also important is to provide some, what you call, placement. So the skill training is not completed until you ensure that they have placement or they get some sort of an assistance. So there is an evolution of policies also one is to see. It's not, policies are not stagnant. They evolve with time. Sometimes we may not have the necessary knowledge, etc. We may have necessary knowledge today. So as per that, they get updated. Thank you.
Thank you for this lovely, lively discussion. This is what a conference should be. I just want to wind up before we break for tea and come back for technical session. I think 4 key things that came out of the discussion and sharing was, I've worked in research organizations. I'm in touch with a bit of policy making, and I try to write something on it based on my knowledge. I think every time saying the government is not doing anything, this is what I have learned. First of all, give them data. And as Dr. Gray said, we have to go and, as we used to tell to our young researchers, unless and until you don't go and dirty your hands, just looking at data on the internet is not data. You need to go down to the grassroots level. You need to dirty your hands. You need to learn. You need to unlearn. And that is what is converted, as we do have a course, at least we had last year, using data in governance. Because if you're just going to give numbers to the government and say, this is what it is, chances are they'll just take it and throw it, or they'll just keep it not knowing. But if you reproduce the data by analyzing and saying, this is good, this is okay, this can be improved, this needs to be deleted, there's some dialogue or conversation that the government can take forward, because they can't do everything. That is why young students, research students from the Department of Public Policy, from everywhere, research organization where I was, today even corporate, today even from institutes like MIAS and IMB, this is exactly what we have to do as one of the key stakeholders to help government to do better. And I think one important point that ma'am said was, yes, a policy is, if you have something from that, it's a great policy, a good policy. If it doesn't have what you want, like if transport policy is, introduced free, I don't go by bus, I'll say it's useless. But I'll never look, it helps somebody who needs it. I think we've got to look at it holistically. And the last point I want to conclude is, India being such a vast country, with diverse country with different needs, as my previous boss used to say, we should never have this approach of one shoe fits all. Policies need to be adapted by states, tweak it a bit to suit what you need. Yes, there is a policy, but we need to see how to use it. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your excellent insight. Thank you to everyone. Let's just break for tea, it's just out, and then come back at 11:15 for the tea break, for the next technical session. Yeah, you can step out. Thank you. You can have tea and coffee. Let it be here, then you come and pick it up.
my supervisor who gave me that space. And I think because of that, I've really got into a culture of taking tough questions and saying, if they tell me data is not there, then I say, with the data, what can I say? Can I tell them what data they need? Can I then move them to where I want them to move? So I don't get, I'm not really frightened with the fact that, oh, you're taking a question that is too complex, it's cutting across disciplines. And being at NIASET, I've always had the advantage of engaging in multidisciplinary research, always used multiple lenses to look at the research question. And I think it has only strengthened my understanding of how the research problems really exist, because today's research problems are not bracketed in specific disciplines. We use disciplinary lenses to look at the question, but the real world problem out there is a problem that cuts across disciplines, doesn't know the disciplinary boundaries. And I think as young scholars, and I think many of you all should be moving into research work, it's very important to understand that no question is embedded in a particular discipline. The question that you should be asking is a question that you see in the real world. And that question can be seen across multiple lenses and you make meaning out of it, right? So let us start from there. Why is the slide not moving? This. Yeah. So I just want to walk you all through how the gender and development policy has been starting from 1970s. Earlier, people always thought that development was very important. And development was understood as a term in terms of impacting the economic well-being. And within that economic well-being, they thought that women also need to have a role. So they just looked at women in development. Once you started looking at women as something within a larger development framework, what happens is you are already using that framework to examine women. So they said, to make it much broader, you will have to look at women and development so that you don't restrict the framework when you are looking at women. From there, they talked that when you're talking of women, you cannot talk of women in isolation. Women are there in the world out there, and so you have men and the third gender who are also part of the larger population. So hence it became important for us to talk of gender. In development, we moved on to gender and development. And it's very important to see that when you shift to gender and development, you are basically looking at structural changes to promote gender equality. So you are no longer looking at a specific section of the society. So you're trying to see how do you improve gender equations, how do you understand gender equality in a much more larger framework. So gender and development became the larger norm. Now when you look at education, see whenever we discuss development, education has always been a very important component of development. And so when you're looking at education, you have different models in which you try to examine education. You can examine it through the lens of human capital, look at education as something that would really impact the economic growth. So you look at education as something that will add on to the human capital. You can look at it from a rights framework. And I can tell you very categorically that a rights framework becomes more useful for you when you look at models of education where you don't look at education as something where the person who is benefiting from education is a beneficiary. You are looking at education as a right that the person has. The moment you move to the rights framework, it becomes very powerful in terms of looking at education. Then the demand is created from the community level, that this is my right, this is not something you're just giving me. This is something that is mine. And so when the responsibility of acquiring that right falls on the community, then education starts functioning better. And then it has moved to what you call as the capabilities approach, where you're broadly saying what it does to each individual, right? So this is the brief sense of what human capital development is, what I talked to you all just now. And when you're talking of the capability approach, you're looking at education through the lens of economic, personal and social. So what is that education is giving to me so that my capacity or my capability is enhanced? Unless my capability is enhanced, I will not get the advantage of education. You cannot just give me access to education, and if my capability is not enhanced, so if I go and attend a school, and if schooling does not enhance my capability, then schooling does not make any sense to me. So the focus from just giving access to the focus of how you develop capabilities is the shift that models of education currently is looking at. So when you're looking at the human capital thing, it is a neoclassical economic framework that you use. For the human rights, for the rights approach, you're using the human rights framework, and here you use the capability approach. And as I said, the capability approach is a much more superior approach. Now, when you're looking at what it does to gender, in the human capital model, it actually assumes that people make education decisions based on their economic ability or in terms of enhancing the economic efficiency. Whereas with the human rights approach, it is the broad rights that you're talking of. And in the capability approach, it looks at recognizing the complexities of the gender issue and the additional effort that it has in terms of implementation. So there are two aspects that the capability approach looks at. One, it looks at the complex nature in which gender actually operates. It does not operate in terms of only man and women. Gender is also very complex within the Indian subcontinent because you have other axes like caste and class that intersects with gender. And so understanding of gender within the context of India is far more complex than looking at gender, how it operates in other societies. So what is gender policy? I thought once I give you this broad framework, then I can walk you all through some of the experiences. Gender policy refers to the modern political policy that aims to promote and protect women's rights as universal human rights. So you talk of women's rights as part of your universal human rights. It has emerged as an important aspect of global governance driven by international human rights movement and organizations such as United Nations. So if you look at the CEDAW framework, where you're not only talking of the rights approach, it has moved to a point where you're talking of how does a particular program actually impact in terms of outcomes. So I cannot say that I have X number of students, for example, enrolled in a school or enrolled in a college, if all these X number of students don't complete the course. So the outcome becomes a measure and not your access that becomes a measure. So the CEDAW framework became a very important framework that was used to promote gender rights, where the outcomes become extremely important. And a large part of my research that is around the area of gender broadly looks at outcomes. Now when you come back to the country, one of the broader things that we have is we have constitutional guidelines for gender inclusive education policy. So at the first level, we have the constitution very clearly saying that you have to have a gender inclusive policy. And these are some of the articles that you have. And all of this you will be able to get it from the internet. I don't want to go through it. But what is very important is you are talking of the fundamental rights that supports gender inclusive education. So by the constitution of the country, all genders have access to education. So there is no issues that we have at the constitutional level. You also have the directive principles of the Constitution, which again promotes not only equal livelihood opportunities for men and women and the third gender, So the constitution was prepared at a time that the third gender was not spoken about, right? So now you will have to extend the meaning to include the third gender. Article 39D also talks of equal pay for equal work. Compared to many of the other countries, given that a large part of our employment was in the government sector, equal pay was for equal work was something that we didn't struggle with. So how did they operate gender? They made sure that women did not get access to higher paying jobs. So they did not make you do the same jobs, but they made sure that you did not get access to higher paying jobs. How did that happen? Because when you look historically, a large number of women were restricted to the family sphere or the home sphere. And men were the ones who actually moved into the public domain. So the moment your entry into the public domain is later, the rules that define public work, whether it is organizations, whether it is institutions, were framed and governed by men, for men. And not what kind of men? And I always say that with my research with women in STEM, it was framed for men who had the luxury of homestay wives. Today, the entire scene has changed. So when you want to change institutional and organizational rules, it is very hard. Because for years, if they have constructed these rules, for years they have operated that way, and then you have a small minority of women now entering it. After some time, you may have the third gender entering into these spaces. Organizations will not be willing to redo their rules so that the needs and the capabilities of this group is also recognized and rewarded within the system. However, within the Indian context itself, because you have private sector that has come in place, they still have now, you have this practice where people can negotiate their salaries. So salaries normally in private companies are not discussed. It depends on your ability to negotiate and see what salaries you can get. And very often, the process or the skills of negotiation is much lesser for women compared to men, simply because we do not have practice or prior experience. It's not because we are not capable of negotiating that. So you have differential pay operating within the private spaces. Hey, why does this not work? No. Why, Adya? Yeah. Now I'll walk you through the National Education Policy, which is the latest, 2020. Here again, the information on the policy is something that all of you can get. I'm not going to, I'll just give you all a glimpse of it. It's definitely an issue. Yeah. So, one of the main things that the National Education Policy 2020 has done is the implementation of the Gender Inclusive Fund. A large part of the policy in education broadly talked of how do you include women. But the whole argument with a large number of gender groups is you don't have enough funds to promote the participation or promote women within the education system. So they talked of gender inclusive fund, which is very important. They also talked of how do you look at community-based interventions, because any interventions that is community-based is generally more effective when compared to something that is done centrally. And finally, the monitoring mechanisms also become extremely important. Next. So when you're talking of strengthening, one of the things that the NEP 2020 talks of is how do you strengthen infrastructure for gender? And this is something that broadly, I'll only do it. Otherwise, this is something that, what happened? Yeah, yeah. And no, I'll handle it. So when you're talking of gender sensitive, no, the previous slide. Yeah, When you're talking of strengthening infrastructure for gender, all education policies have been talking of strengthening infrastructure. If you look at the kind of work that has been done in the area of education, we were constantly led by research that has been done in the West, where strengthening infrastructure was always seen as an important aspect in terms of enhancing quality. Whereas in India, over the years, I'm not arguing that infrastructure is not important, but I think the over focus on strengthening only infrastructure in the absence of strengthening capacities of teachers or teacher training broadly did not bring the enhancement of quality of schooling that has happened within the country. And to make the shift, I will come back to the kind of work that we have done to see how that shift will happen. So one of the things they do is they start programs specifically for girls, like the KGB program that they have, which are residential schools that they give for girl child, because girls are not able to travel long distances. Safety is an issue. In our culture, I think most families, the women or the girls carry the custody of looking at taking care of the sanctity of the family, because of which they think that that is an important aspect of which they would not allow girls to go to schools as they move to secondary schools. And so the Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalaya was broadly started for that. They also have the JNV schools, and I can tell you that the JNV school has been an excellent experiment, which are not directly focused on women. They are also open for boys and girls, but I think it is a very good opportunity for children in rural areas to access the best facilities, the best teachers, and also have a residential setup so that the issues and the problems you have at home does not impact your learning. And I think making it residential schools, and that is again, I think that has happened after a large amount of advocacy work of several groups who said that for education of the poor, the biggest problem they have is when they go back home, they have to work, because it's part of the ecosystem in which they are in. They go back home and they don't have lights at home. They go back home and they don't have anybody to help. They do not have access to the peer group. That is why I feel that the JNV is a very good example, and today I'm working with the JNVs trying to develop a model for the education for the gifted and talented, and I find those children exceptionally bright. And I think that opportunity is a big opportunity they have given them. They have also tried to look at introducing preschool sections for the KVs. See, one of the things we should understand is the when you look at the Indian society, you have a huge gap in terms of people who have and who do not have. The inequality is very big. And with the introduction of schools and different schooling system, you're only enhancing the inequality. So while you're giving a blackboard to a school in a rural area, the school in the urban area is getting a computer. How do you bridge the gap? Because people who belong to the upper socioeconomic status will always try to see how will they maintain the edge so that these people don't reach there. So it's extremely important for us. So the preschools was one of the things that they started in the private schools. So which meant that you have already a opportunity to learning very early. And if that opportunity is not given to the younger children in the rural areas or among the poor, these children will already have a head start. And so they looked at starting the preschools. They also talk of gender sensitive curriculum and training, which they think is very important to promote actually girls' education. So they talked of ways in which the curriculum should have examples of women scientists, have examples of non-stereotypical roles that women play, so that girls don't really think that these are the roles that women should do, or have boys actually washing vessels or anything like that. So they were trying to see in which way they sort of break the stereotypes that are broadly sort of seen within the society and make sure that the school textbooks at least don't endorse that. So they have done that. But even with this, I don't think there's a great change, and I will come back to that very soon. They also have been talking of the gender balance in higher education. Thanks to the effort in terms of to increase the number of women in higher education, today in India, I think the participation of girls in higher education is fairly good. The participation of girls in the STEM education at the undergraduate level is beyond boys. But then in the engineering segment, I think it's been very stubborn, and we have not been able to go beyond the 28% mark. At the master's level, we are almost touching 50, and at the PhD level, we are almost at 35 or so. So we are doing very well when you compare ourselves to other countries. But then where is our problem? Our problem is after the PhD, where do these women go? And that was the study that I had done along with the Indian Academy of Science, brought the data to the fore and said that the problem of the leaky pipeline for India, for women in STEM, is not at the undergraduate level like for a large number of Western countries. For us, it's the issue after PhD. And so that got attention. If you want the government to look at it and pay attention to it, you will have to do large-scale study and present the data in a way that the government will actually pay notice to it. They also talk of safe and inclusive learning environments. Now I'll take 3 quick examples and tell you how you can do research to impact policy. One of the things that broadly bothered me as a young scholar in education was, despite the effort of the government to improve the quality of schooling, the quality of schooling was not getting better. And constantly they said it is because of the problems you have at the personal level, because girls do not want to go to school, or they said it's because of poverty at home. And I was not very convinced that these two are good enough reasons. Not very exposed to rural areas, born and brought up in a city. So, but still this really bothered me. I said, no, I don't think it is because girls don't want to go to school, and I don't think poverty could be the only answer of why girls are not in school. And so we undertook this study on village caste and education, and for the first time tried to really develop indicators of quality of rural schools in the country that actually represented the Indian schools. So beyond the infrastructure, you had indicators like the active instruction time. So an average school, it was a study that I did over a year with a time sampling method, and you found that the average length of a school day in a poor quality school was 45 minutes. If a child spends only 45 minutes in a day for learning, what learning do you expect the child to do? Particularly when they go back home and they don't have any help from home. To the best school that worked for 3 hours and 15 minutes. The other indicators was the teacher and the teacher's effectiveness actually impacted the quality. So if the teacher was good, then the quality of learning within that school actually got better. So it became impinging on the teacher to enhance the quality of the school. And the third thing was, when community demanded education, whenever the teachers' children also went to the same school, and the large amount of community children access those schools, who are also powerful in the community, the school functioned better. With the introduction of English medium schools and private schools, all these community now send their children off to private schools. So then there is no community pressure for the school to really deliver good quality school. And this was something that actually the study pointed out, and it was after that study, I remember NCERT who did the study across 8 states. And this study, I did it between 87 and 93. And by 2000, if you look at all the international funding programs that came to look at improving the quality, community was given a greater focus, training was given, teacher training was given a huge focus, looking at giving students aids for teaching was a great focus. So just by not focusing on infrastructure alone, the other aspects were given focus, but this could be done over a long term of study or PhD work that you were able to impress upon. So even today when people talk of what quality, when you're talking of quality in a developing country, you always feel that you have to look at other indicators and not the indicators that work in the West. So one of the things that I took away from this research is, unless you go down to the field and unless you dirty your hands like what Dr. Annapurna says, and look at the data and see what the data is telling you. And if you're true with research, I always think that your research findings are hugely valid. I tell all my research scholars, if you spend a year or year and a half in the field, I am very confident that your thesis is worth it. But you have to do your field work very sincerely, because the field is the best teacher for you in terms of what it tells you. With that, if you look at the theory and try to make sense of it, your work will be better, right? So the other work that I had done around 2010 was this particular report, which was Trends in Higher Education, Creation and Analysis of Database in PhDs. For the first time in this country, it was so hard to get any data on PhDs, particularly in terms of the gender breakup. I had to move to specific libraries across the country and get this data from the library, because every library had a thesis copy with them. With that data, I said that you will be able to see what is the enrollment of gender, both of men and women in higher education. You will be able to see where the PhDs are produced. And so Delhi became the PhD capital. So this report got a huge amount of public attention. And there was a large number of articles that was written where they talked about what is the impact of gender segregated data on looking at promoting higher education. After that, 2012, 11, I think you had the first report, that is the All India Survey of Higher Education. Today, all of you, with a click of a button, will get enrollment of students across disciplines, by gender, by state, all of that made available when you're able to do research that can impact policy. And the third piece of work that I did was on women in STEM. Now I will, how much of time I have, Anupama? Yeah. So I'll just walk you all through women in STEM. This has been work that I've been doing for the last 15 years. And when I did this work, one of the things that I shared with you all earlier is we did not struggle to get women into college. We did get women into science at the college level. The struggle is after PhD. How did that study happen? So this was again a study where we tried to track PhD women who had completed their PhD but had dropped out and are not in the work scene. It was very hard to trace these women, because many of these women, because even to do a PhD in the STEM discipline is not easy. They are generally very bright girls, and they had dropped out for reasons. And if you talk to the policymakers and talk to people at the government level, they said they dropped out because it's their personal choice. But when you actually tried and traced them and actually interviewed them, over 100 data points, and I told myself that I will not start my analysis till I reach at least 100 women. I could reach about 94 women. When the academy said that we cannot be supporting you unconditionally in terms of the time frame, and then when we did the analysis, you found out very clearly why women left science, because what the policymakers and men said was not what the women are saying. And that became extremely important in terms of impacting the policy. So these were some of the questions that guided my research work over the last 15 years, trying to evaluate women's professional success when compared to men. Why are men more successful than women in professional careers in STEM? To understand why it is. I also looked at professional outcomes vis-a-vis familial outcomes. And how does one understand that? And the pipeline metaphor I was saying, no, where are we losing the women? And it's critical for us to learn not only from those who left the system, but it's also important for us to learn from those who survived the system. So your sample has to have a representation of both sets of women if you want to understand the problem completely. So these are some of the statistics. I don't want you to pay too much of attention. It is out there in the Aish thing. But what I want to say is, very clearly the statistics shows that women in STEM, the enrollment has increased over the years. They are doing pretty well at the master's level, and they are also doing very well at the PhD level. Now, what does my research strongly point out to? One, there is definitely a large number of women in the STEM discipline. That's a positive sign. So we acknowledge that. Which are the disciplines with low number of women? Engineering, physics, mathematics. So you keep asking, why these disciplines when the women go up, why are the numbers smaller? It's also important to try and see who are the kind of women who are in the STEM discipline. So when you look at it, you find women who come from better socioeconomic status have moved into the STEM discipline earlier, but women in rural areas still have barriers in terms of entering the STEM discipline because many of these research institutes are not located within their village, within their district. Parents are not willing to send them to far off states for their higher studies. They are worried about the age at marriage. There are so many other cultural, social factors that impact women's participation in the STEM discipline, and it's important that we understand that. So what it says is, it became very important for us to also look at women who are within the system. So when you talk to a large number of women and talk to them about the work-life balance, they have very different ways in which they strike their work-life balance. And today, during tea, we had a conversation with Manjula about the work-life balance, and she brought in an element of leisure, which I think is very important as part of the work of understanding women in STEM. Because large number of professional women like us had a world of work, had a world of home, and that's it. You have no time for anything else. Home, you manage your work, you're done with it. And over the years, that is how we have done. And when you actually peak down in your career, you have zero network, you have no hobbies, because you have not really cultivated it, because you did not have the time. And you ask each one of us sitting in this room, including even the senior women, the story of Dr. Annapurna will not be my story. My story will not be her story. Manjula's story is not my story. So I'm saying each woman have their own stories in terms of how did they manage work and life. If you ask me, for the first part of my career, when I was building my career, I had a very automatic way that when I reach the campus, I drive into the campus gate, I open the door of work in my mind. I get into my work, I do my work, but the moment I get into my car and close it, then that is closed. Then I go home, and then the world of home is my life. So I used very strong boundaries between work and home. I was able to do in the initial stage of my career. As your career picked up, that line blurred. You started taking work home, the work at home became more, you started worrying about the home at work. So it became very blurred and very messy during the time you were building your career, because pressures on both fronts were very, very high. And then now, when you're almost peaking your career, you are trying to see how do you really manage. Again, I've drawn back the boundary. And that's how it has happened for me. But I'm sure many people have different ways in which they do it. Today, when you talk to a large number of women in STEM, they say that today we have the mobile. Such a big boon, because then I can have somebody who will cook for me, I can talk to my maid, I can tell her what she has to do. So they've taken different support systems to try and manage their domestic responsibilities. They have taken different systems to try and manage their responsibilities in terms of child care, and hugely now the elderly care is becoming a big responsibility for the women. And here again, you're looking at ways in which you can manage it. So I'm just saying that unless you constantly are in touch with the field, you will not understand what are the issues that women in a specific discipline is facing, and how that can be actually conveyed to the policy makers so that we get a change in terms of work. So one of the things is, when you looked at what does your research tell you, it tells you that you need to understand the structure of opportunity in employment of women. When you talk of the structure of opportunity, all of them say that there is access. We are not saying women cannot apply. If you want, we'll put one more line and say women are encouraged to apply, but that doesn't solve the problem. If you actually have in-depth interviews, they will tell you how the interview board is hugely dominated by men. They will tell you how women are asked very difficult or delicate questions that will put the women on a defense. They will ask you, are you married now? Will you have children? You have no business to know that. What you need to know is whether I will perform here at work. Do you ask that question to the man? No. You will ask me whether I have an older parent at home I need to get. Why? Why are you interested in it? As a young scholar, when I got into work, and when I got into my PhD program, and I remember, I had not said I was just married. I got into the PhD program, got selected, and then my guide said, you did not tell me I'm married. You're married. I said, why should I tell you that? I will finish it faster than any of your male students and give you a very good PhD. And I always think that really worked hard, 5 years, gave a good PhD, and you're very happy because today your PhD work becomes part of postgraduate textbooks. And this you have done with determination, because unlike the others, you did not have time to network. I did not have time to attend several conferences because it was very important that I completed my work and reached back home. So a year and a half of field work, a year of writing at the hostel. I just ate, slept, read, thought. That's all I did. I'll think only that. And I always tell my students who are writing, 1 year, that is your dedication. You eat, you sleep, you're tired, you read, you write. You cannot do anything else if you really want to put a good PhD in place. You don't have any other method in which you have to do, because writing is the hardest part for you. So when you look at 3 decades of research on work and family roles dominated by conflict. So every time you talked about what happens to women, the focus of the research has always been on conflict that women experience. The focus is not on how women deal with the conflict. So what happens is, when research focuses on the problem and not the solution, then it becomes an issue. And it's important that we pay attention to the solution rather than the problem. So when you look at work-life balance, 1, you have found that there is lack of family responsive policies for non-tenured faculty, including doctoral scholars. So when you're looking at maternity leave, you do not have that for doctoral scholars, and now they have introduced it. At the time we had done for postdoctoral students also, maternity leave is not there because their positions are not tenured. And that's the time you get married and you have children. So that is something that we have constantly advocated and said they should be given that. Similarly, you should see that you realize that there's no blatant gender discrimination in hiring, but you have problems, what I just described to you all, in terms of the committee that you have. Even if you're part of a selection committee, how do you as a member of the selection committee get the committee to hear you? Because you are in a minority number and the men will definitely shout you out. So how do I make sure that my voice is heard? You say, yes, you have said your point, let me complete my point completely. And how do you help that your point is not only heard, it is also valued in the judgment when they finally make the selection. This means you will have to stick out your neck. And when you stick out your neck as women, there are problems that next time they'll make sure that you're not part of any of those committees, because they find that you are a difficult person. They find that you unnecessarily raise gender issues where there is no gender issues. And unless you tell yourself that I will do it because I'm convinced there is gender discrimination, it's going to be harder. Now let me take you to the last side. The other thing I wanted to pay attention is when you're talking of mentoring, which becomes very important for women in STEM. And in terms of the policy, we have been able to push in the Department of Science and Technology that mentoring needs to be something that is actively promoted for women. Because for men, I think mentoring becomes natural simply because they hang out with each other, simply because they have also learned that over experience. Whereas for the women, mentoring is always a challenge because they are already struggling to make sure that their place is secure. To additionally mentor young scientists and manage your home role and manage your multiple responsibilities become harder. But I think we have done a large number of trainings for the DST women scientists saying that how mentoring is very important so that women's numbers are actually increased. Because there's a lot of tacit learning as senior women and senior professionals that we know. And that is not out there in the book for you all to read. They will tell you that it's very important that you lie low for some time. They will tell you when you need to raise your voice. They will tell you you need to choose your battles. I tell my young colleagues, you can't participate in all the battles that's happening in the organization. Choose your battles, fight your battles so that you win. Don't put your hands into all battles that's happening. So this kind of learning is something that becomes very important for women when they are moving up in their career. What I want you to say is what women are doing now. Women today, and I'm sure that, and I think that's an area that needs to be studied, women are pushing their age at marriage. They are making sure that they negotiate everything even before marriage. Everything is on the table. Yes, we are getting married. Where are we living? What jobs you will do at home? What jobs I will do at home? If children come, what is your role? What is my role? Everything is negotiated. And now you also have a section of women who choose to just be career women and not get married. Choose to get married and not have children. I have no opinion of whether this is right or wrong. But what is very important is women are learning how to deal with the system. And one of the responses they are doing is to try and do, sets of options, what is put out there. Now, I will take you to the last slide, which is very important. So what do you need to do when you want to advocate gender in terms of policies? One, you will have to do large systematic studies because they will dismiss any of your qualitative study to say that this is one example. So when I say this is what will happen, and this is the experience I have in terms of one interview, they will say, no, this does not happen for me. It is like men, when we do gender training, and we do it for very senior men who come from upper socioeconomic status, they will tell that, no, we don't discriminate boys and girls in my house. I have sent both of them to things. So I said, because you have the resources, you have sent both of them. If you had limited resources, whom will you send? That they don't want to think. They think the world is them. The world is not you. You who belong to the upper class or the upper socioeconomic status, you are such a small fraction. You are in a world where a large number of families are struggling with resources. So if my resources are hugely less, I won't send both to education because I don't have the resources. If I can muster some resource, then I will send the boy for the education. I will not send the girl. So it's very important to see that preference, and those preferences also operate among even middle class people. So you will say boys doing engineering, girls doing arts. Why? Even in my house, and even today I hold my father responsible. I tell him that just for 1 mark, I did not get an engineering seat. The year before, he was willing to send my brother to a private engineering college paying full donation. He had to pay only 10,000 for me because I was just 1 mark less. But I was told that you should have got that 1 mark if you had to go to engineering. I have no regrets. I just think if you're good, you will do well. And if I look back, I think a large number of my engineering friends have been doing boring work. I think I have really had a very exciting career. So no regrets about it, but very important to realize that how these biases operate despite them telling, no, we treat both boys and girls equally. So it's extremely important for us to try and build large-scale data. So even the women in STEM, about the women who left, who have dropped out of the PhD, I had to get the numbers. I can't say this is a story of 2 women, 4 women, 6 women. I said this is a story of 94 women across the country. Then you compare it with women who are in STEM. You compare it with women who have got a PhD but have gone to the industry. And again, I come back to the question that Manjula was saying, that you don't have a policy of a one-size-fits-all, particularly in a diverse country like India. So you can't say that, and if you have in the policy-making bodies, women who have been successful in STEM, they will never know the problem of women who have left such STEM. Those committees should have representation of women who have left STEM, women who are in the industry, women who are in academics, because all their problems need to inform policies when you draft for women in the STEM discipline. And that is extremely important, and if you have to say this very emphatically, unless you do research, you won't be able to emphatically tell people this is what it is, and this is the fact. It is also important for us to understand that the gender policies need to be reviewed. You need to review it constantly. You have a policy in place. Now, even the reservation policy, for example, you have a reservation policy, affirmative action for children who belong to the disadvantaged communities. How many of them are accessed by girls and how many of them are accessed by boys? How many of them are accessed by girls who belong to the lowest strata of the disadvantaged community? Unless you do that breakup, you will not understand. And the same thing was what I was just telling Annapurna when we did the Karnataka Human Development Report. Karnataka would always barge and say, we are doing very well. Because we will compare ourselves with the North Indian state. Hey, we are above average, we are doing well. So in the Karnataka Human Development Report, when I came in as an author, I said, we will look at the whole country, we will also look at the southern states. You're not doing well. Why? Why is Kerala doing better than y'all? Why is Tamil Nadu surging ahead of you when you were ahead of it? What is that you're doing that they are not doing? And now if you say Karnataka, because we have pushed for that South Indian comparison, further down we have pushed and said, look at the data district level. Look at data of most backward district. Look at data of most backward taluk. The state also is not homogeneous. South Karnataka is very different from North Karnataka. Why should North Karnataka not be as developed as South Karnataka? Why should all the colleges and universities be in and around Bangalore? Why? And so today, when you're able to put that data down and tell that to policymakers in multiple fora, the policymakers are able to see it and then say, yes, we should have a university in the north, we should have colleges in the north, the skill universities should be spread out, unless you do this talking. And unless you say that when you're looking at the higher education sector, you also should look at faculty distribution. Should look at how many women are there among faculty. Why are you looking only at enrollment? The moment you look at faculty, the numbers come down. The moment I look at institutions of national importance, the numbers come down. Indian Institute of Science, 100 years old, has now 9% women in their faculty. It had less than 1% when I started my work on women in STEM. Constantly pushed them and said, you people have only 1%. And I remember when Dr. Raja Ramana was there as our director and he was the chairman of that. No, Professor Anita, this does not work. You're just saying, I see a lot of girls walking around. I said, this is data. You go back to the department and see, and they will not put departmental data out on their website. Even today, I have said every institution should put their data in terms of gender breakup across departments, for faculty, for working staff, for students, across levels. Unless that data is available, researchers like us, unless you're very passionate, you won't go back and look for that data. Because collecting data itself is very painstaking. So the biggest problem you have in terms of policies is you do not have enough data, or you don't have data in the form that will help you promote gender equality. So let me just stop it here, and I'll be happy to take questions. And finally, I want to say that we need to work with men. I don't believe that we have to just look at women. I think there's a lot for us to learn from men. And if you have men taking the cause of women, it's easier for us to push it. That does not mean that we sacrifice what we need, but very important that they are also part of this entire endeavor.
Hello. Yeah. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your elaborative presentation that touch every element of women's life, starting from how the challenges that they face in education and the work life and the interview panel when they're negotiating the salary, then the choices that they make and the evolution of the choices that women have been making, right from, getting married to not having two children, having late marriages and all of it. So I really appreciate this elaborative presentation of yours. To summarize, as I see, the presentation started with importance of gender policy in education. Then you moved on to talking about models in education, where you said that capability approach is a superior one because it is customized according to the women's need. It is not a generalized policy where we are trying to fit women in a man's world. Then moving on to that, you also spoke about what makes a policy successful. You said that it is not the access to education that makes a gender policy successful. It is, however, the outcome of the policy that makes the gender policy successful. Then you also talk about the constitutional guideline for the gender policy, where it is clearly mentioned that Indian constitution does not have any prohibitions for women to be a part of the education system. However, how much we are able to stand up to that and how much women are being a part of the education system is what that we are questioning here. As we see that there is a positive trend in every element, right from your elementary education to the people, the women holding PhD, and even after having the higher education, the kind of challenges that they're facing, what kind of job prospect they're getting, how they are not getting job prospect as much as men are getting. So all this element of women's life, right from their elementary education to PhD, has been touched and talked upon. And you also spoke about the scientific way of doing research and bringing policy and what kind of, parameters that we need to look at when we are touching upon something so sensitive as like gender policy. So I would thank you for that. And I hope that your experiences, vast experiences of working with multiple government organizations and bringing it to the boardroom has helped our students and will motivate to take up resources related to sensitive issues like gender. So I would now like to open the floor for question answer session. So anybody who is interested to have any dialogue with ma'am or ask any questions, please raise your hand.
Hello. Rajan and Lamba point out there in their book that India is producing more number of, and it's not a gender question, they are simply talking about that India is producing more number of higher educated people at the lower level of GDP per capita. Meaning to say that we are at $2,600 per capita GDP. However, compared to us at some in past, some of the developed economies used to produce lower number of educated men and women at that GDP per capita. So how do you see that? Maybe we are producing more number of students who are to remain unemployed in the market because we are at the lower level of GDP per capita. Maybe we don't have the employment opportunities because country is poor and we are producing more number of graduate boys and girls.
No, when you're looking at the higher education sector, if you ask me broadly, see, we are producing a large number of graduates who are unemployable, and that's not necessarily general education, it is also with respect to professional education. I feel when you're talking of the higher education sector, I have serious concerns in terms of the quality of the higher education that we are actually imparting to students. Very often, I think our higher education is not aligned to the changing job market that we currently are having. Because I don't see any study or I don't see any attempt of any group to understand how does the job market change. Because the job market broadly, the employment sector or the employment space is hugely changing. So what you are training your students is not what the employment market requires. The interface of the understanding of the employment market and its input into the education becomes extremely crucial. Because I just think that for a country that did not have a large number of literates, and we have created a higher education system where we think that we want a large number of people who actually move towards the PhD level, but this was true when we had only a small segment of people actually accessing the higher education. Once the clientele of the higher education has completely changed, I think the aspirations of students have been very different. There are a large number of students who get into the higher education sector who want to work post-undergrad. They are not really looking at doing a PhD. For want of no work, you are actually moving from one level to the other. I think the other big problem we have with the higher education sector in India is it is not at all aligned to skill. Look at higher education sectors across the country. Not all of them are moving towards PhDs. We don't need so many PhDs. We just don't need them, because if you look at the PhD numbers that we have, forget about the quality, which is a bigger question. But the numbers that we have, you don't have employment for a large number of these people who are part of the PhD. So today's employment market is employing an overqualified person for a job that can be done by somebody who is post-12. So I'm just saying that unless there is a very serious talk between the employment sector and the education sector, and unless education sector stops operating like like an industry, and as a way in which you are actually, you are making profit, unless we sort of move out from that mode, it's going to be problematic. I think there is a serious need for us to relook at the curriculum of the higher education sector. And I don't think any of our curriculum is changed. Thanks to how the higher education sector is, I can tell you, the moment I finished my master's, I decided I'm not ever going to get back to teaching. It can't be exciting for me. If I need to teach something that I have learned for the next 40 years, and you don't give me the freedom to rework my curriculum, you don't give me the freedom to create curriculum that makes sense to my students, then I think teaching can never be exciting. And if it's not exciting, that's not where I want to go. Very happy that moved into the research space, decided what I wanted to do. Research agenda, you set up for yourself, nobody set up for you. And you could pursue it in a more meaningful way. So I think it's very important that the higher education requires a complete rehaul. And it's been an area that I have been reading and writing about, doing policy work and advocating. Very hard to hit that area because it's also a very powerful sector. They are not going to take to, it's not that they don't know the solutions, they don't want the solutions. That's very important for us to see. But I don't give up. We still should see how do we talk to them and get the sector to really respond.
Before we move on to the next question, ma'am, we have a small token of appreciation for you. So I call upon Sashidhar to hand it over to you. Next question. Ma'am, you.
This is Ranjini. I don't know if you remember me. Long time back, I was in NIAS. This was very long time back. Now with RV University. My question is related to one of the concepts that was there on your slide, intersectionality. Profound work by Kimberly Grenshaw's work on how different social categories impact gender and a lot of other categories like race, caste and all that. In your work, how do you see that gender, apart from gender, how do you see intersectionality playing? You talked about Indian Institute of Science and your work in STEM. How is that playing out? Yes, there is, you brought out gender very clearly, but moving beyond gender into the intersectionality space, I was wondering what are the kind of nuances within that in your work?
I can just quote to you one of the works that we have done. I actually did a survey of the summer fellowships that the Indian Academy of Science offers to students, mostly master's students, and it's actually an exposure they get to some of these premier institutes where the students go. And we did an analysis, and there I did an analysis not only of gender, because gender was very strongly evident, but I also did in terms of caste. And I can tell you the amount of resistance to reveal the caste, particularly among the scientists, is huge. In fact, being a social scientist, one of the, one of the cardinal principles is you can respond and the respondent can choose not to respond. Because that's something I have to respect. So I gave that choice, and you can't believe that the caste level data just did not come. They believe that there is no caste as much as the scientists believe that there is no bias within the system. To even enter within the Indian Institute of Science or any of the science institutions is very difficult, and keep the conversations going. So that is one example. One more I can give. One of my PhD students currently is doing her PhD work, and we are looking at the journey of scheduled caste students within the portals of an engineering college. And I think a large number of studies, not large, at least most studies in the engineering colleges have been done in the IITs. And gender has been looked at mostly in terms of looking at the qualitative data. There's some study like Namrata Gupta broadly looked at those questions. But with this girl, what we did was we tried to get into the second-rung, state-run colleges, so not the IITs, because there you have girls who come from the scheduled caste who are also not generally of the upper class. And so how do they navigate? And you should see the kind of biases and issues that they face, both in terms of caste, gender, and class, and how it interfaces. So I think when you're looking at intersectionality, a large number of studies done qualitatively is something that we'll have to do, develop the categories, and then looking at large scale thing. So they say that, you know, in terms of, for the caste, they say that one of the things they were saying is, if I belong to a scheduled caste, I'm able to talk to other girls. But they will talk to me only if they don't have friends from their community. By chance you have your upper class group, then they will not pay attention to me. Two, they also make fun of the level of English and the type of English that you're speaking, because your language also has an accent that is aligned to your caste and whether you are urban or rural. So you have very, very subtle ways in which these things enter into the educational space. So you cannot say that because we give supernumerary quota and 20% you're given to women, does not mean that women will survive the system. So it's very important to do first a large number of qualitative study, and then look at refining your category or indicator or your data point, and then generate large scale data and then put it out to them. So same thing even with the women scientists, even on gender, we had to do it as a qualitative study and then move towards a quantitative study. That's the only way we'll be able to impress upon policy.
You wanted to ask?
Very good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Gautam, first year MA Public Policy student. I wanted to ask regarding, did you find in your study anything about the pay gap that the female and male students or PhD students receive, and what do you think about how could they transition in the corporate? How could you increase women's role in the senior management, and how could they take more decision-making roles in the, they could become the change makers in the corporate field?
See, when you look at the glass ceiling and you're talking of moving towards decision-making roles, it's very important to look at some examples. And that's why I always say that we don't have to say we will not look at what is happening around the world. Very important that you look at it, but you critically examine it. If you talk of ways in which you can move into managerial roles, if you look at countries like the Nordic countries, they are very clear that they want that percentage of women in that position. Now, currently, what we are working with the PSA's office, where we are looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, we have created a chart that institutions have to fill in, where they tell us what is the number of women across levels and tell us how they will increase it within what time. So if I belong to an organization that has 0 women at the level of a dean, I should be able to say in the next 5 years, at least how many deans I'll put, what is the percentage of deans that I will put in place. So whenever you're looking at representation and moving to the higher decision-making level, I feel that within our country, for the change to happen in terms of the number of women entering that space and that proportion increasing and then looking for change is harder. I think you'll need actually a simultaneous function of both affirmative action, which a large number of women will refuse. Particularly scientists say that we don't want to be treated differently. But I think my experience in gender is you need affirmative action and you need to sort of work towards how do you negotiate in that spaces. And you need it for a certain period of time. I just feel that affirmative action by itself will be like the affirmative action we have by caste. And that is no explanation of why change did not happen. So I think one needs to look at how do you use it in a way. And I think one of the good ways, at least one good example I had was when the National Law School, Bangalore, when they took their first 2-3 batches of students, they had taken a set of students who also belonged to the disadvantaged group. But they made sure in the 5 years that they had, that they gave them additional support, that by the 5th year, you are not able to differentiate between them and the others. So that is what you should be doing. You can't say, I'll give you entry into the space and then treat them shabbily through that space or through the course, and then say, why you have not done well, we have given you opportunities. That doesn't work, because I think it's very important to see that the outcomes are given preference. So in terms of decision making, that is the only way you can move. Say that you need women at the decision making roles and tell them go back and look. In UK, I remember that for one search committee that had to put a certain set of women in the decision making role, the search committee went back and said, we couldn't find anyone. They said, go back and search. So if you say that we will not fill it till the women is there, they will go back and look. Because when you look at higher positions, when I have interviewed a large number of women, women who are capable do not apply because they set higher standards for themselves. They feel that I may not qualify. And a sense of failure of applying and not getting, men take it easily. For women, it's a big issue. You look in classrooms also, women will speak up only if they are sure 200% times. Men will talk whatever comes to their mind. I'm not demeaning the men, but I'm just saying they have the confidence to say that, and they're able to take critique. I mean, they're able to take those things. If people laugh, it's fine. For a woman, it's very hard to take it. So what happens is you don't talk, and I tell women, you should talk. It's okay if people laugh. I tell all students who come into any of my sessions, if you don't open your mouth, the loss is yours. Because your doubt is not the doubt of the others. If you don't open your mouth, you lose. So I think it's a very good thing for the women. Even here you see, you have older women talking. I didn't see any one of these people asking me any questions. Why? Well, are public policy girls.
Do you have any more questions?
Hi ma'am, I'm Sarah. I'm a first year MA Public Policy student. So you did mention about how accessibility is not enough and enhancing the capabilities is very important. So I understand that your work is pertaining largely to women, but I'd like to ask you that in your opinion, what measures can be taken at the policy level to enhance the capability and not just the accessibility of transgender students in education institutions?
So I've always, like I was telling you, it's very important that you don't pay attention to enrollment. I've been fighting with the Aish data people, saying that I'm not interested in your enrollment. I'm interested in how many of them are completing. So I think outcomes become very important. And I always say that when you don't get your outcomes, go back and see there is some problem with your access or the process. You have to fix it. Because your measure is only with outcomes. Your measure is not with access. It is, just to give you a very standard, simple example, which actually was something that we observed when we did this study on the status of rural women in Karnataka. We say we give you access to drinking water. And she was also telling you that about the bus. Similar example. So if you give me drinking water at a time when I'm in the field, I cannot collect the drinking water, no. So who controls the time when the drinking water is supplied to me? So I should be at the controlling point. Means I should have a say in terms of when the water is left, so that I'm able to access that facility that you think you have given me. And so I think it is very important for us to shift focus to the outcomes. I would encourage all of you all to look at the CEDAW framework. I find it a very powerful framework when you're looking at questions of gender, because the shift is completely on outcomes. So I cannot say I did this, I have policy for this, I don't care. What has it done to the women? You tell me those numbers. You tell me, has it made women better? Do we have that seen? That is the only thing that we should keep asking.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for being patient and answering all the questions. Thank you to all the participants. We have been hearing about gender and policy since last 1.5 hours. So I would like to conclude the session and move on to the next session. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Priyanka. Thank you, Dr. Amrita Kurup. Moving on to the next session. The next session is about gender and healthcare, gender policies in health. So we have been hearing about women, genders and policies in education. So education is one of the indicators for which how we measure women and their equality in society. And we have been hearing from Dr. Amrita Kurup about women's spaces in households, women's spaces in educational institutions, and women's spaces in decision-making positions. Now I'd like to call upon Dr. Anupama Shetty to the dais. Dr. Anupama Shetty, please welcome ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. I'll just give you an introduction.
Dr. Anupama Shetty is the Mission Director and Philanthropy Partner at Mazumdar Shah Philanthropy and Mission Director at Biocon Foundation. She has over 20 years of experience in varied roles, and she currently leads CSR initiatives for Biocon Foundation. As a PhD student from Tata Institute of Social Sciences, her work revolved around strategic change in healthcare organizations, accreditation, and safety culture. She has a bachelor's degree in medicine and surgery from Mysore University and a master's in hospital administration from Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Her experience as a physician, administrator, and researcher has helped shape her perspective to CSR, combining a systems-based approach with a focus on scalability and sustainability of interventions. Dr. Anupama Shetty also partners with MSP on several projects across science, academics, and social impact. We welcome you, ma'am. And I would also like to call upon Dr. Prashant Kumar Chowdhury, the moderator for this session. Dr. Prashant Kumar Chowdhury is the Assistant Professor at the Department of Public Policy. He completed his PhD from MAHE Bengaluru. Dr. Prashant teaches political science and allied subjects for the Masters in Public Policy. Welcome, sir. Now I'd like to hand over the mic and the space for Dr. Anupama Shetty.
Thanks, and I hope I can present from there, right? Thanks. So the difference here is that most of the speakers here are coming in from an academic perspective, and I come in from the practice purview, so I'm a CSR practitioner, and as the introduction said, I've worked across domains, and so it's my experience that I'm talking about here, and I would defer to the views of experts and also to the students in understanding what could be the practice policy interface. That would be very valuable for me. So I'll keep my presentation brief because I know that we are short of time, and just to be fair to you. Yeah. So before I begin, I just thought in order for you to have a flavor of, I'm not sure how many of you all have experience in healthcare, or have you ever been part of any community outreach programs? Any experience in healthcare? No. Okay, so this video here, no, for the students more or less, yeah. So you're evergreen. So the thing is, I just thought I'd show you a brief video which would give you a sense of what CSR is about. So I represent Biocon Foundation. Biocon Foundation is the CSR arm for the Biocon group of companies. This comprises Biocon, Biocon Biologics, Syngene, as well as Biocon Pharmacy Limited. 2% of our profits before tax is flowed into corporate social responsibility. Through the CSR arm, which is the Biocon Foundation, and there's also Biocon Academy, we undertake several programs in the domains of healthcare, education, environment, rural development, as well as women's empowerment. So these are some of our domains. Today, I would limit myself to healthcare and, of course, the topic which is under consideration. So just to give you a glimpse of what we do in the space of healthcare, this is one of our programs. As I mentioned, Syngene, they helped us fund this video, so we finally have a video to show to you all.
Every day on Syngene campuses, thousands of scientists use the power of science to improve lives of people, patients, and animals all around the world. Using the latest technology, they work on research, development, and manufacturing projects for clients across industries. But that's not all we do. We also support the communities in which we live and work through corporate social responsibility programs delivered by the Biocon Foundation. Our programs focuses on 4 areas: community health, science education, protection of the environment, and the safety of women and children. Our flagship program is running the Ilaj clinics. The Ilaj clinics are fully digitized to ensure all medical records are up to date and easily available. This focus on electronic medical records helps to deliver better treatment and monitor clinical outcomes. But it's not just about the technology. The last mile healthcare delivery model works through proactive community outreach and collaboration with government, grassroots NGOs, and the wider community.
ನಾನು ಹುಟ್ಟಿದ್ದು ಬೆಳೆದಿದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಇಲ್ಲೇ ಕಾಡು ಮಧ್ಯದಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಜನಗಳಿರೋದು. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ರೋಡ್ಗಳಿರಲ್ಲ, ಮಣ್ಣು ರೋಡ್ ಇರ್ತವೆ, ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಬದಿ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ಒಬ್ಬೊಬ್ರು ಮನೆ ಇಲ್ಲಿದ್ರೆ ಇನ್ನೊಬ್ರು ಮನೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿನೂ ಇರುತ್ತೆ. ನಾವು ನಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗಿ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಟ್ರೀಟ್ಮೆಂಟು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಸ್ಕ್ರೀನಿಂಗ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ. ಇಷ್ಟೆಲ್ಲ ಕಷ್ಟ ಇದ್ರೂ ನಾವು ನಮ್ಮ ಸಮುದಾಯ ಜನಗಳಿಗೆ ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ಸಿಗಲಿ ಅಂತ ಮನಸಾರೆ ನಾವು ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಸಂಸ್ಥೆಯಿಂದ ಈಗ ನಾವು ಬಂದು ಏನಾದರೂ ಹುಷಾರಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂದರೆ ಕಾಯಿಲೆ BP ಶುಗರು ಆ ರೀತಿ ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತೀವಿ. ಬಾಯಿದು ಎಲ್ಲ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ತಪಾಸಣೆಗೆ ಬಂದು ನಿಮ್ಗೆ ಏನು ಕಾಯಿಲೆ ಇದೆ ಹಾಗಂತ ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ ಸರ್. ಆಗ ಈ ತರ ನಮಗೆ ರಕ್ತ ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಶುಗರ್ ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಎದೆ ಬಡಿತ ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ, ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅಸ್ತಮ ಇದೆ ಸರ್, ಅಸ್ತಮದು ಟೆಸ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿ ಆವಾಗಲೇ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ ಸರ್ ಯಾರಿಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟಿದೆ, ಏನಿದೆ, ಎಲ್ಲ ಕಡಿಮೆ ಇದೆ, ಜಾಸ್ತಿ ಇದೆ ಏನಂತ ಹೇಳಿ ಅದೇ ಸ್ಥಳದಲ್ಲೇ ಹೇಳ್ಕೊಡ್ತಾರೆ ಸರ್. ಅದರಿಂದ ನಮಗೆ ತುಂಬ ಅನುಕೂಲ ಸರ್.
These partnerships support remote and tribal community health. This way, we manage chronic conditions while educating communities about non-communicable diseases, helping them avoid the personal impact and long-term economic burden that these conditions represent.
ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಕಂಡು ಬಂದವರಿಗೆ ನಾವು ಇಲಾಜ್ ಕ್ಲಿನಿಕ್ ಕಳಿಸ್ತೇವೆ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇವಾಗ ಮೊದಲಾದ್ರೆ ಬರಿತಾ ಇದ್ರು, ಇವಾಗ ಮೊಬೈಲ್ ಟೆಕ್ನಾಲಜಿಯಿಂದ ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಸರಿಯಾದ ಟೈಮಲ್ಲಿ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಚಿಕಿತ್ಸೆ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ.
ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಮೈಲ್ ಅವ್ರು ಬಂದು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಚೆಕಪ್ ಮಾಡಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ, ನಮ್ಮ ಜನರ ಆರೋಗ್ಯ ಜನರ ಒಂದು ಒಳ್ಳೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
So I hope that gave you all a flavor of, one of our healthcare programs. So as opposed to only having clinics, what we did was we had a last mile, community approach, wherein we partnered with local grassroots NGOs and actually took healthcare at a household level. But having said that, I just wanted to go, set the context for the foundation. So I have a short presentation. I'll just take you all through it. And as I mentioned, these are our domains. We work across, several areas. And interestingly, we also work on women in STEM. And I was informed from your report. I just understood. So it's such serendipity that I have one of the authors who influenced, our decision and also whose data helped us. It was very critical for us to place the data before the board, and that was super helpful. So what are the, why did we, first of all, engage in primary healthcare? And I think as students of public policy, many of you all would have accessed, a lot of studies in this space. We began the Ilaj Smart Clinic program. This was around a decade back, and we were informed from, obviously, what we had seen through our own baseline surveys, but also informed from secondary data sets. There were issues of staffing, there were issues of infrastructure, issues of consumables, but also most importantly in terms of outcomes. You just heard Dr. Anita actually speak about it's not the numbers. It's not a number game for us. What we wanted to do, in fact, was understand how are the patients faring once they come to our clinics. So this was, some of the, studies which are done by Dr. Jishnu at that point in time, which looked at are we really giving quality care to the patients? Are we spending enough time to understand their trajectory, the clinical histories? So, it was based on this that we started the Ilaj Smart Clinic program. And so these are the foundational elements. Yes, we did, support the government centers. We put up our own foundation clinics. We supported NGO partners. This has been recent, but of importance is that we put in an electronic medical record, which helped capture data sets. We put in enhanced diagnostics. So at that point in time in 2014, when we started, most of the primary healthcare centers didn't have hematology, analyzers, or, even blood chemistry. Nothing was happening. And so at that point in time, integrated diagnostics was a big boon. And apart from that, we understood that nobody would be able to operate the laptops. So we gave them data entry operators, clinical data entry operators. There were no lab technicians, so we provided lab technicians. And recently, and based on our experience, what we realized is that we needed to move out from the facility to a more population-based approach, and which is why then we came up with the Ilaj Health Navigators program. The video which you just saw was all about the healthcare navigators, actually trained frontline healthcare workers. They're upskilled, and these are the people who go at a household level data, actually take healthcare to the households. And I would be, speaking about the gender perspective, but I just wanted to set the context and tell you all about the healthcare program first. And so, of course, this is, we had 23 clinics. We have downsized right now because we're trying to focus on building certain capabilities within the system, and for this model to showcase, certain evidence-based kind of actions on ground, so that we can then scale up in the years to come. And so we are based across Uttara Kannada, Dakshina Kannada. As you can see, there is Bengaluru, Yadgiri. Chamarajnagar was where this video was actually shot. This was in the Bilirangana Tiger Reserve. Yeah, and we work with the Soliga tribes and through NGO called IPH, Institute for Public Health. And yeah, so what have we learned? Now, we've almost had a decade of experience now working at the primary healthcare clinics, working at the front lines, screening camps, as we call them, and what are we seeing? So what we witnessed. Now, see, for us as a CSR entity, it is not enough if we run only clinics. What we do is we do very robust community outreach. This community outreach, it reaches schools, it reaches women in their workplaces, it reaches Anganwadis, we do specialist camps, and we also go out, because we're based, of course, in and around our area, we have a large number of factories, we also visit factories. And, and in that sense, there are multiple different cohorts that we are addressing. What did we find? That there is a neglect of adolescent health. If you have to go to schools, generally till higher primary, there is at least, some effort to see that, the child nutrition is being addressed. But if you have to go to high schools, you'll find, and we have done large surveys, so not only are our surveys, but based on the secondary data, what we are seeing is large number of anemic students, a large number of children who are undernourished. And of course, there are no records which are being created. You have the Rashtra Bala Swasthya Karyakram. Today, do you know how often they visit the schools? Once a year. What do they measure? Height and weight. Do they know what are, what are the indices for, say, anemia? Do they know what is a vision like? No. So these are being done by CSR entities like us, but it's all siloed. So you understand, so visual, all this data, it needs to feed somewhere. And so this is something that I wanted to, of course, talk about later. And also, you all would be aware of a very long-standing program called the Weekly Iron and Folic Acid Supplementation Program, called the WIFS program. Now, this WIFS program, it gives iron and folic acid to the students once a week. Do you know how often they are able to take it, if at all? So it differs. Again, there is because it depends upon the stocks, and it depends upon whether the PHC has stocked and actually made an attempt to give it to the schools. So we find that more or less students don't have regular access to iron and folic acids, and therefore anemia is not being addressed. And since how long this program has been running, WIFS program? Just take a guess, it's 40 years. And still we have anemia. I'm going to say, if you have to look at the data sets, we still have a large chunk of adolescent girls, yes, 100%, but even boys being anemic. And then, yes, based on our visits to the factories around us, to the other work establishments around us, what we found was high habit prevalence. By habit prevalence, I mean to say tobacco and smokeless tobacco, gutka, khaini, and this actually led to the development of oral lesions. There is a specific pathology called submucous oral fibrosis, SMF as we call it, OSMF, in which you can't open your mouth. And we've seen several cases of this in the cohorts which, you know, we are kind of, who are under surveillance, and this is happening at 18 years of age. For this pathology to start at 18 years of age, can you imagine when the child might have started? So you understood. So what I'm saying is that the gender perspective, it has to, it has to be gender specific. Like, you know, in the sense, it's not that it is only the adolescent girls who are having issues. I feel it's adolescent boys also who need to be addressed, but it needs to be context specific. You know, there are certain things, anemia, for example, in girls. It could be habit prevalence in boys. For example, we've had a large research study which was done in North India, and it's on polysubstance use. It is conclusively found that variables such as age and gender, the male gender, you know, these were the ones which decided the polysubstance, the use of polysubstance use. The GATT survey, I'm sure all of you who have ever read about the GATT, the Global Adult Tobacco Survey, will also find this data there. Peripartum, so while we were addressing reproductive health, you know, to a certain extent, I'd like to state here that at Biocon Foundation, while we do run the clinics and we do address community health, you know, and most of the aspects of it, our emphasis largely has been on non-communicable diseases. So non-communicable diseases, for those of you who may not know, it comprises diabetes, hypertension, comprises cardiovascular diseases, cancers, asthma, mental health. So this is the ambit of non-communicable diseases. And so when we were evaluating also ANC or antenatal care, reproductive care, you know, during pregnancy, how many times they come, what we found was there was no emphasis being given to peripartum mental health services. Even at the government centers, you will come, you will get a physical checkup. But has anybody evaluated whether she is depressed? Even postpartum depression, it's all under the radar. There's no data out there. So this is something that we saw was missing. And then, you know, we had our own camps which we held. These are called the NCD, or the non-communicable diseases specialty camps. But you know what we found? It was mostly the elders, 50 years and above, who'd come. And they'd come regularly. Of course, we did, you know, a lot of robust follow-up to the household levels. We'd call them, we'll visit their houses. But we saw that a large chunk of the population who was actually at risk, 30 to 50, were missing. Because obviously this is a working age population. And therefore we understood that we need to now revise our strategy. How do we reach these people? You know, so these are some of the challenges that we faced. Cancer surveillance, you would have heard about PMJAY, and through PMJAY now you have the Arogya Health and Wellness Centers, right? Arogya Health and Wellness Centers are supposed to have a nurse who is a CHO, or the community health officer. Do you know that they do not know how to do oral cancer screening, breast cancer screening? Yes, they may have said that they've been trained. But on record, we've gone and we've witnessed it at the health and wellness centers, the section at least where we have worked in Bengaluru, that they practically don't know how to do the screening. And you know, we said, okay, fine, if you don't know, we will do the screening because we have a team, we'll come and do it in your center. And she shows me a table. And she said, you can do the gynec examination on the table. So there was no effort at ensuring dignity of a woman. Why would I do it on a table? It was not an examination table, it was just a school table, like, you know, and she said you can make the lady lie down here, and there was no curtain. I mean to say, you know, so all these aspects, you know, were lacuna, or, you know, in terms of just understanding the need for privacy, dignity of a patient. That needs to be part of, you know, this entire pathway. And then community-based risk surveillance. What we found was that though ASHA workers had been tasked with going to the household levels, understanding what is the risk at a household level, there's something called the CBAC form. This risk surveillance had happened way back, somewhere in 2020, 2019, and after that, not at all. So what does the government have? It is sitting on data which is redundant. Today, does it have a risk profiling of the population? No. You know, so these were some of the, you know, in terms of gender, I would say that there were both men and women at risk. So it wasn't just the women. And what we found in community outreach was that we needed to have different strategies to cater to women, different strategies to cater to the men, so that we were equitable in our approach. That is something that speaks for itself. There's a lot of data which you can look at from NFHS 5. I don't want to go over that, but it will also corroborate evidence that screening rates are abysmal. Okay, anemia rates are still very high. Maternal health, access to WIFs, the iron supplementation. How many of them are actually believing in iron? In iron supplementation, they don't understand health-seeking behavior in itself. It's quite it's lacking. So these are the aspects that we focused on, and so we devised the proactive community outreach approach, wherein we looked at, okay, we would have a facility, but we'd have an arm of healthcare workers. This is beyond the ASHA workers, who would go out to the community level, who will assist in actually assessing at a household level what are the risks that we are seeing here, pushing them to the nearest healthcare facility. And we started putting camps in place. But do you know, women, even though they want to do breast cancer screening, it's very difficult for them to come out of their households. So we had to convince a panchayat. Then we found that a large chunk of the women were actually in the factories working in and around us. Will the factory, the managers of the factories give us time, pull out the women from the, the work lines? Not happening. So we went to the Department of Factories and Boilers. We went to the MD there, and I spoke to him. I said, you need to give us permission. So the levels of permissions we've taken just to make a community outreach happen, so that we can access the women, access the men in their workplaces. So the panchayat, the taluka health official, the district health official, local NGOs, and then there are the other gatekeepers. So I think you've also mentioned this, that there are multiple layers that you need to go through just to make things happen. And that's when things started falling in place. And of course, we brought in a lot of technology. The device that you see there below is for breast cancer screening. It's a non-contact, privacy aware kind of a device, wherein the woman is within an enclosure. She's curtained off. Nobody is doing a clinical breast examination. But this is a thermal camera which is aimed at her breast, and it picks up the spots because it is also interfacing with an algorithm, an AI algorithm. So it's an AI-enabled breast cancer screening. That's what the government has also started following. We were ahead of the curve at that point in time, and so we put it in place. The women love this. They don't want to go to CB, which actually shows, CB is clinical breast examination, which just goes to show that privacy and dignity are so important to be incorporated in your clinical care pathways. And of course, like I said, we have our robust school health program, for example, that is happening. So there are various facets through which we are trying to address healthcare. And then, it would be amiss of me not to mention that we have a very robust oral cancer screening program. Like I mentioned to you all, in men, we've seen that there is a prevalence of habit prevalence starts very early in age. So for us, it was very important that we start focusing on adolescents. And we also have an M-Health, which is nothing but an oral health application. It talks about how technology capacity building, extremely important. What we did is we took frontline healthcare workers, we trained them on how to use this M-Health app. And the images from this, they go to another institute called KLE Dental College, and the specialists there are able to tell us, that whether this lesion is suspicious or not. So we've established this kind of different pathways, collaborative pathways, but capacity building, community engagement, collaboration, extremely crucial to make this happen. And again, differentiated in terms of gender, because we saw that young male population was extremely vulnerable for this. Yeah, and this was about today the reach of this program, because we work across multiple states, we have multiple research arms. In this program itself, we have more than 40+ publications. We've addressed polysubstance use, we've addressed capacity building of healthcare workers and how we can influence care pathways. So our submission to the Ministry of Education, we've placed a paper before them wherein we feel that AI tools, if they're given to frontline healthcare workers, it can help in downstaging oral cancer across the country. So this is happened through this program. So this is, I would say, I'm really glad to state that one of the programs which has reached that kind of level, at this moment. And we're working with IISc. In fact, it was Indian Institute of Science who helped us develop this algorithm. So we had a bank of images that we got, and through the bank of images, now we've been able to kind of move this program forward. Yeah, so I just wanted to kind of, pause here and talk about what were the, the tenets of the program that actually helped us. One was upskilling. very important to take local champions. Again, gender played a big role. We didn't take only male candidates, we took a bunch of male and female candidates so that the community was also comfortable. We empowered with tech and point of care devices. Very important to have behavioral change communication campaigns. Do you know, I'm not talking about the Biocon experience now. I was formerly with Narayana Health as head of CSR there. We ran a very large anemia program. We wanted to reduce anemia in Rajasthan, in Jaipur, in 2 districts. And when we went to the school, and I was rattling off, "Aapko ye tablet lena hai," and there was, none of the kids were connecting with me, and we said we are going to release one biscuit, and that biscuit was to have a new form of iron. It's called the sodium ion EDTA, which can actually improve your level of hemoglobin very quickly. The bioavailability is very high. So within 1 month, you will find a change in your hemoglobin levels, And when I talked to them, and then what we had done luckily is that I knew that this might happen, that what we are going to say to the kids may not actually have traction. We had a Nukkad Natak, so we did a Nukkad Natak in Marwari language through the local groups there, and street plays which were done. Nukkad Natak is street plays. And you should have seen the difference. The quiet children during my talk, suddenly they were leaping, they were laughing, and this Natak and the message that came through to the students, it was so powerful. So what I'm trying to say is that even for girls to understand the importance, there are various strategies through which we can make this happen. Behavioral change communication being one of them. And as doctor was saying, outcomes are extremely important. How do you communicate outcomes to your students? We told the students, see, you have taken the biscuits for 1 month. We tell our patients who come to our clinics that you've been coming to us now regularly for 3 months. Today, if you have to see, your diabetes is well maintained, your hypertension is well maintained, clinical outcomes can be communicated back to them. Another aspect is rigorous follow-up. Do you think that if you go to a primary healthcare center, you go back again, you will go only for breakdown maintenance? There is no preventive maintenance what is happening. So what we have incorporated in all our programs is extremely rigorous follow-up. We have a dedicated frontline healthcare worker group that calls up men, women, regardless of gender, and see that please come to our clinics. You have a follow-up appointment, and we make sure, because it's a community, it's a close community, and this happens quite well at our place. Also, once you have detected, like for example, we detect a breast cancer case, can you leave them? Then is a continuum of care, ensuring that there is a referral. Most of the women which we have seen, and this is again gender specific, for breast cancer, the elderly women are reluctant to go forward for treatment. Why? Because they feel that they're a burden on their family, that their children will unnecessarily need to spend on them. Another thing is that today PMJAY, it covers tertiary healthcare. It covers, but it doesn't cover the pre-op, the before the diagnosis. There's a range of tests which need to be done. For example, mammography needs to be done, ultrasound needs to be done. That in itself is going to cost around 10,000. Do you think the family is ready to spend? No. So oftentimes, what will happen? They will go off to Ayurveda. They will take that and they'll come back with stage 4. We've seen this so often, and to the best of it. So for me, it's so important that for me the referral is maintained. I see to it that, can I get a mobile mammography bus in? Can I send them to a place where the mammography is subsidized? There is out-of-pocket expense though. Women at an elderly age will face out-of-pocket expense, and I hope that this covers by PMJAY. So that is one recommendation that we have, that investigations need to be covered, because after investigation everything gets covered by the government, but not before that. So these are some of the aspects that I wanted to flag. Of course, I also want to talk about everything cannot be done by an ASHA. There needs to be an ASHA plus program. Today the ASHA is heavily burdened, and yet they load her with more programs. So we feel that there needs to be an adjunct. These can be local volunteers who can be co-opted into the system, healthcare navigators who can actually focus on the burden of non-communicable diseases. Today an ASHA is more heavily working on RCH, reproductive and child health. But we really believe that non-communicable diseases today, there's a very large burden. Today 64% of the mortality in India is happening because of NCDs. What in 1990 was around 37% has gone up to around 61.8% today. Those are the stats. Having technology in place, having community engagement in place, and also students as champions of change. What I believe is that it doesn't start when you enter into a young emerging adult. We have a program called the CHAMPS program, wherein both boys and girls are taught how to measure blood pressure. It's a very simple program. We've done it in schools. We've been doing it year-on-year basis. Around 100 students we train every year, and they screen around 2,000 people in their community level. They screen them for diabetes, hypertension, and also they look at antimicrobial resistance. That's something that just we've added. But we want to add menstrual health. You know, when we want to make boys talk about it, it's as important for them to know about menstrual health. And you know, it's not something to be done closed doors only between girls and women. So those are the kind of barriers that you know, we are trying to break. And so I call it the C's because it's easy for me to remember: community engagement, capacity building, connected care, clinical outcomes, continuation of care, continuity of care, collaboration, communication. And I've looked at it from a complex adaptive system approach. We believe that all of these work at a microsystem, mesosystem, and a macro system level, you know. And so informed from this, at least this is a framework which I have, it's not adapted from anywhere. I just made this and put it in place. But it helps us kind of, you know, put our programs, think of the last mile person, and also at a policy level, what are we trying to say through our programs? You know, are we informing anyone? So some of our recommendations are: understand gender specific health needs, and this would help improve health outcomes. You can't have a one size fit all kind of a policy. It needs to be differentiated. We have to have a gender responsive workforce. Very important that they understand that women, what are their needs? You know, if you're just going to get women to one room and say, abhi late jao, that's not going to happen. You know, we have to have those kind of responsive frameworks built in. Women's health is not reproductive health alone. They're only looked at through the lenses of reproduction. They're way beyond that. There is NCD. There is non-communicable diseases, but hardly anybody is paying attention that a woman, today our cardiovascular survey, which we had done in Austin town, which is a urban informal settlement around here, when we had done it, we found it was the women aged 60 and above sitting at home who were unemployed, who were at higher risk compared to the men. You know, so this was a study which was done by St. John's, it's still not published, but you know, it was valuable information for us. Otherwise, you would always imagine men to be more vulnerable at higher age groups. It's not so. Do we have gender disaggregated data sets which we can evaluate? You know, we have it for cancer, but we need it for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension also. We need to have a multi-stakeholder approach. I think all of us speakers here would, you know, definitely talk about the fact that it cannot be done by one person alone. It's a multi-entity approach. Gender-based health curricula in schools, very important to have this gender sensitization to health topics happening at school level. Evidence-based research, this I think is a no-brainer. Everybody knows about this. Policy practice interface. I wish some of you could intern with us or help us understand how our programs are shaping up. What is it that we could do more? Where is it that we could, you know, speak at a policy level? A policy brief. That's something that Dr. Annapurna, you've always been telling me about, and I wish you know, that we could do this some point in time. So this is my submission. I hope I've done it in time. Very quick presentation. Yeah.
Yes. I'm told that we are running out of time, so I would not summarize your presentation, ma'am, if that's okay with you. So right away, I will directly take away questions from the audience. Yes, ma'am, you need that. Yes,
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. I had one question about cancer screening, breast screening. Was this the Niramai screening, AI screening? Okay. I just wanted to know a little bit about it's non-touch, non-invasive. So how is the uptake from your experience? Yeah. Yeah, mammography is quite painful, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was my question because I have interacted with Geeta Manjunath, and yeah, that was the question, and I have read their work. So. Yeah. Have you published any specific work on breast cancer screening? Okay. Thank you.
Ma'am, just a quick question. So, what is your take on not having separate policies for antenatal, postpartum care, and having one single inclusive policy for perinatal health care?
Absolutely.
That starts from 22nd week of pregnancy and that goes up to at least till 1 year of pregnancy, and especially focusing on mental health care aspect of
See,
it,
this is what I was saying. You know, good I came here. So this is how it should be. It should be structured this way.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So what we are finding in the field is what I have told you all. But in terms of policy, this is what input we needed.
Right.
Like, you know, that how it could be woven together, because we are seeing it in silos.
Yes.
Mental health is not addressed at any of the PHCs
Correct.
today.
Yes, ma'am.
You
Yes,
know?
ma'am. Yes,
And
ma'am.
we've come up with a tool through St. John's by
Right.
which frontline healthcare workers can be skilled very quickly, and they can address, assess common mental disorders.
Right.
We've also done this through NIMHANS.
Right.
But where we lack is having this policy integration.
Yes, ma'am. So I've always felt that we should have one inclusive policy, which is perinatal health care, rather than focusing on antenatal and postpartum separately and not being able to, give our best in both these separately. And again, mental health care aspect. So I think when we need to begin with this mental health care aspect of it, we will have to train the ASHA workers.
That is my submission again. Why just the ASHA? Can't there be another cadre of workers? I
Right.
understand
Right.
it's a, it's a expense on the exchequer, but the fact is, healthcare expense has to increase. What proportion of our GDP we spend, we know how much it is.
Right.
But there needs to be another cadre worker who can look into
Right.
NCDs alone, and then ASHA can be doing one part of the, story. I feel.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's my question. That's all.
Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm Arihan from first year MA Public Policy. Ma'am, I had done my internship with National Health Mission, and I wanted to ask what I wanted to ask was that you mentioned that women have much more proneness to illnesses at later stage, which is 60 plus, whereas it is also that the men die at earlier age than a woman. So can you please explain on that?
So the thing is, yes, you are right. There is a greater predilection for men to die of cardiovascular diseases, and we always thought that women were protected, but it is not so. After menopause, in fact, what happens is that women are equally vulnerable. So the fact is that in terms of cardiovascular disease, at least, what we do is we focus equally on both men and women. It's not that, there is a greater predilection for men alone. So this is the pathway that we have chosen. What I told you about, that was based on a study in an urban informal settlement here in Bengaluru, where we saw this. But again, there needs to be large-scale studies to help us understand today what is the risk, because I'm sure, these are, there needs to be a trend analysis of today where we stand in terms of cardiovascular diseases. Yeah, gender disaggregated data sets, those are going to be crucial for us. Yeah. I can hear you, don't worry.
Okay, from high school only they'll start the menstrual cycles and all educations from the school base itself. Why not about the breast cancer and other things? Because if women are educated only, we can take them to the diagnosis or anything like. So
no, you're right. See, the thing is, we have begun diabetes and hypertension at high school level. Breast, I think, what we have not thought of it at a school level. Maybe we can think of it, but I would say college is the right time.
Ma'am, even in PU and all, we include biology. In biology subjects, they'll include the everything, but not about the cancers. It is not anywhere mentioned.
Yeah.
And recently in India, breast cancers are increasing in numbers.
Absolutely,
So,
it's being seen in younger women also.
yeah. And also there is Anganwadi, they'll treat, they'll give them some nourishment for pregnant women and also the delivered women, and also to children also who are studying basically in rural areas. So it's not really that frequent for them and not regularly for them. So what can be the
you're saying in terms of Anganwadi, the role, or you're saying that
Ma'am,
it's
it
not...
is a government supplements which is given through Anganwadi.
Correct, yeah.
So it is not really frequent in rural areas. The plan is in force since many years, but it is not to that efficiency. Efficiency is not that great.
So I would differ here. What we have seen is that Anganwadis are, in fact, functioning not bad. Like, I would say that yes, there are things that they lack. Like, for example, I will tell you our experience. In Bangalore, where we have worked in the Anganwadis, the set of supplements that were supposed to be given to the children and also to the, pregnant lactating mothers, those were given. Even we have also supplemented it through Akshay Patra program, for example. There is Annapurna Trust. There are several NGOs who are working in this space, seeing to it that this phase of the life is supported. But what I feel is health education is not being addressed. Why is this important to you? Why do you need to continue? So the child will come to the center, have nutritious food, go back home and have kurkure. Correct? So what is the sense in it? So the thing is, and also the other thing that we have not factored in our urban locations, urban Anganwadis, is the migration of populations. Often you will find that the Anganwadi teacher or the Anganwadi supervisor or instructor, she is a Kannadiga, in our case at least that's what we saw, whereas the population, migrant population, largely Hindi belt based, and so they weren't able to communicate. Another thing is called the Poshan tracker. The government is using technology. I would say more than 60% of the ladies of the Anganwadi, they did not know how to input data into the Poshan tracker. So this was, they used to take it home, they used to ask their children to help them input the data. So it was, retrospective data sets, which were actually not, who is using these data sets? How are they examining it? Like, it was based on their experience, Anganwadi teachers, supervisors' experience, that she was able to identify, yeah, this is a SAM and MAM case, I have to send it to the first referral center, the FRUs, as you said. But the Poshan tracker, it requires constant capacity building. That's what I'm saying again and again. It's not about giving you a mobile. It's not about giving you tech. Also making you savvy enough to understand how it is to be used. Also understanding your populations. To your point, what I'm trying to say is Anganwadis are there. We need to support them. Do you know the last capacity building which had happened for the Anganwadi workers in our area was 3 years back. And then we decided to get in it. Now we are doing it on a year-to-year basis with St. John's. St. John's instructor come in and they kind of have this training session with Anganwadi workers. So I think you need to stick to multiple interventions at multiple points, to kind of support health, but that's just my submission there. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for the talk. Just before we break for the lunch, I would invite Srishti Sahu to hand over a memento as a token of appreciation to you, ma'am. Thank you. We'll break for lunch and we'll come back at...
One more task. We forgot to take a group photograph in the morning. Can we have a group photograph? Can all of you come here? Everyone? How do you all want to organize? You want to put some chairs here and people stand, or how? How would you like? We want this. No, we want the background of SAMAH. We want that.